Hello beautiful people. Welcome to God of Fiction. In today's episode, we explore, what if Gringotts revealed Harry had 15 blocked bloodlines and he stripped Dumbledore of his titles? Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Vaults Don't Lie. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry Potter had been awake for 2 hours already, which wasn't unusual. Sleeping past 6 in the Dursley household meant missing breakfast entirely, and Aunt Petunia had a talent for conveniently forgetting to save him anything if he came downstairs late. So he was up at 4:30, had already made breakfast for 3 people who wouldn't thank him for it, swept the kitchen floor, and was sitting on the back step watching the garden when Hedwig, his owl, the one birthday gift from Hagrid that the Dursleys couldn't confiscate without technically breaking the law, landed on his knee with a cream-colored envelope clutched in her talons. She looked insufferably pleased with herself. "Morning," Harry said, scratching under her chin. She clicked her beak and held still for exactly 3 seconds before nudging the envelope against his hand with pointed impatience. He took it. The seal on the back wasn't Hogwarts. He'd seen the Hogwarts seal, thick red wax, the school crest, very official and slightly intimidating. This seal was black wax pressed with the image of a key biting into a coin, and beneath the image, a single line of text in a language he didn't recognize. The envelope itself was heavier than it looked, the cream paper dense and almost waxy to the touch. His name on the front was written in sharp, angular script that looked like it had been carved rather than written. Harry James Potter. The smallest bedroom. Number 4, Privet Drive. He broke the seal. Mr. Potter, you are hereby summoned to Gringotts Wizarding Bank, London, on the morning of the 31st of July, being your 11th birthday and the date of your legal majority for purposes of inheritance assessment under Goblin Commerce Law, Statute 7, Clause 12. This summons is not optional. A representative of Gringotts will collect you at 7 o'clock in the morning. Please be prepared. Director Ragnarok, Gringotts Wizarding Bank. P.S. Bring the letter. You will need it for entry. Harry read it twice. Then a third time. Then he looked at Hedwig. Did you bring this? She ruffled her feathers in a way that clearly meant obviously not, that's not how owls work. He looked back at the letter. Not optional. Something about those 2 words sat differently than the slightly threatening letters Uncle Vernon occasionally received from the council about his car being parked incorrectly. This wasn't a bureaucratic suggestion dressed up as a command. This was a statement of fact. You will come. Full stop. Harry folded the letter carefully, tucked it under his mattress, and spent the rest of the morning thinking very carefully about how to be gone by 7 o'clock without Uncle Vernon noticing. As it turned out, he didn't need to bother. At 6:55, a sharp knock echoed through the front door, not a polite knock, not the hesitant tap of a postman, but the kind of knock that said I will knock again and it will be louder. Harry was already dressed. He heard Vernon's heavy footsteps on the stairs, heard the door open, heard a silence so complete it was almost loud, and then descended the stairs himself to find his uncle standing in the doorway staring down at the small, impeccably dressed goblin on the front step. The goblin had pointed ears, sharp amber eyes, and wore a suit that probably cost more than Vernon's car. He was holding a leather-bound folder and looking at Vernon the way a tax auditor looks at a man who has been filing incorrectly for 12 years. "You," the goblin said to Harry, stepping neatly around Vernon's considerable bulk as though he were a piece of furniture, "are 30 seconds late." "Sorry," Harry said. "Traffic." The goblin's expression did not change. "Gripknot. Junior Account Manager, Gringotts. You will follow me." He turned and walked down the front path, and Harry, without a word to his uncle, followed. Behind him, Vernon made a sound like a deflating balloon. The drive to London was in a car that appeared, from the outside, to be an ordinary black taxi. From the inside it was considerably larger than physics should have allowed, the seats were real leather, and there was a small tray of tea that Gripknot did not offer to share. Harry sat in the back and watched the suburbs of Little Whinging dissolve into motorway and then into the choked morning arteries of central London, and thought about the word inheritance. He'd never had anything to inherit. His parents were dead and everything they'd owned, he assumed, had gone to pay for his years in the cupboard under the stairs. That's what Uncle Vernon had implied once, when Harry had asked why there was nothing of his parents left. Gone, Vernon had said, with the tone of a man discussing a bad investment. All of it. Count yourself lucky you've got a roof over your head. Harry had been 7. He believed it. He wasn't entirely sure he believed it anymore. Gringotts rose out of Diagon Alley like a white marble challenge to the rest of the world. Harry had been here once before, with Hagrid, the day he'd learned he was a wizard and that he apparently had money, a vault full of it, which had felt both thrilling and slightly unreal. Now, walking through the brass doors behind Gripknot, past the silver doors, into the high-vaulted main hall with its chandeliers and its rows of goblins bent industriously over their ledgers, it felt different. It felt like walking somewhere that already knew him. Gripknot led him past the main counters without stopping, through a side door Harry hadn't noticed last time, down a corridor lit with green-flamed torches, and into a room that was small and very still. The walls were bare stone. The floor was bare stone. In the center was a stone table, and on the table was a shallow stone basin, a small silver knife, and a piece of parchment so old it had turned the color of weak tea. Behind the table sat a goblin who was not Gripknot. This goblin was older, much older, with a face like a topographical map of somewhere that had experienced significant geological event. His suit was black. His eyes were the color of old gold and looked like they had seen the actual construction of the bank. He was reading something in the leather-bound folder Gripknot passed him, and he did not look up immediately when Harry entered. Gripknot closed the door behind him and stood at the wall. Harry stood at the table and waited. The old goblin read for another 30 seconds, then set the folder down and looked at Harry with an expression that was professionally neutral and somehow, underneath that neutrality, extremely displeased about something. "Harry James Potter," the goblin said. "I am Director Ragnarok." "Sit." Harry sat. "Do you know why you are here?" "The letter said inheritance assessment," Harry said. "The letter said what I wanted Albus Dumbledore's monitoring charms to read," Ragnarok said, with a precision that made Harry blink. "What I actually need you here for is considerably more significant. But we will arrive at that." He folded his hands on the table. "I will first explain the process. The basin before you is an inheritance assessment vessel. You will make a small cut on your palm, the knife is enchanted to be painless, and the wound will close immediately, and allow 3 drops of blood to fall into the basin. The basin will then display your complete bloodline heritage, any active or inactive magical inheritances, and any blocks or suppressions currently placed on your magical core or your bloodline access." Harry looked at the knife. "Any blocks?" "We will discuss what we find," Ragnarok said, "after we find it." Harry picked up the knife. It was lighter than he expected, the handle warm. He pressed it to the center of his palm. There was a sensation like a word being said in a very quiet room, more of an awareness than a pain, and 3 drops of blood fell into the basin. What happened next was not what Harry expected. He had expected something gentle. A glowing name, perhaps. A quiet list. Something appropriately solemn and administrative. Instead, the blood hit the basin and the room changed. The stone walls lit up. Not with fire, not with conventional light, but with lines, thin, branching, luminous lines that spread outward from the basin like roots, or like cracks in ice, filling every surface of the room including the floor and the ceiling and the backs of Harry's own hands. Each line was a different color, and there were far more of them than made any sense. They spread and spread and spread until the room was more light than stone, and the parchment on the table began to fill with text that moved too fast to read, and the basin itself was vibrating with a low, resonant hum that Harry felt in his back teeth. Ragnarok was looking at the display with an expression Harry couldn't fully read. It was somewhere between professional satisfaction and something older and harder. Gripknot, at the wall, had gone very still. The light held for nearly a minute before it began to settle, the lines fading slowly into the stone like water being absorbed, until the room was ordinary again. The parchment had gone still. It was now covered in dense, small writing, front and back, with annotations in the margins. Ragnarok picked it up. He read it for a very long time. Harry waited. He was getting better at waiting. 15, Ragnarok said at last. 15 what? Harry asked. Bloodlines. Ragnarok set the parchment down and looked at Harry with those old gold eyes. You have 15 distinct magical bloodlines active in your heritage. Several are expected, Potter, Evans, which is to say Peveril on your mother's side, and 1 or 2 others that are peripheral. The remaining 11 are not expected. They are, in fact, extraordinary. And every single one of them has been blocked. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Blocked, Harry said. Suppressed, Ragnarok said. Sealed. Locked behind magical barriers placed on your core at some point in your infancy. These are not accidental dampeners. They are not the natural result of magical development. They are deliberate, skilled, and layered enchantments, placed by someone who knew precisely what they were doing and precisely what they were trying to prevent you from becoming. Harry was quiet for a moment. Who? Ragnarok tapped the parchment with one long finger. The magical signatures embedded in the blocks are complex and partially obscured. However, Gringotts instruments are among the most sensitive in the world, and when I say the signatures are partially obscured, I mean that someone made a significant effort to hide them. He paused. They did not entirely succeed. Dumbledore, Harry said. It wasn't really a question. Ragnarok's expression did not change. The primary signature matches several other enchantments we have on record from the Hogwarts account files, yes. Harry looked down at his hands. The lines were gone, but he could still feel something, like a chord played in a room that had been silent for too long, the notes still hanging in the air, asking to be followed. What are they? He asked. The bloodlines. Ragnarok turned the parchment so Harry could see it, and began to read aloud in a tone that made each name land like a stone dropped into deep water. Potter, obviously. Ancient line, significant magical strength, with particular affinities toward offensive magic and battle strategy. Evans, your mother's line, which traces back to the Peveril brothers, specifically Ignotus Peveril, making you the lineal heir to the Hallows legacy and to a branch of pre-Hogwarts wandless magic that was believed extinct. He paused. Gryffindor. Harry looked up. Your line converges with the Gryffindor bloodline through a secondary branch that was lost to record roughly 200 years ago, Ragnarok said, without particular drama, as though this was a clerical note rather than a genealogical earthquake. It is nevertheless valid, and it carries with it access to Godric Gryffindor's specific magical inheritance, elemental fire affinity, enhanced physical resilience, and the right of claim to Gryffindor's personal artifacts, including artifacts not currently listed as school property. Continue, Harry said. His voice was steady. He was faintly proud of that. Slytherin, Ragnarok said. This time Harry didn't look up. He just absorbed it. A gaunt branch through your mother's family, which is the same branch that Voldemort's line descends from, though through different forks. You carry Salazar Slytherin's direct descent, and with it Parseltongue as a native ability, not a transferred curse fragment, as some have theorized, enhanced magical perception, and an affinity for blood magic and wardcraft that the Slytherin line is historically known for. I can speak to snakes because I'm actually a Slytherin heir, Harry said slowly. Correct. The curse fragment theory was always analytically weak. This explains it considerably more cleanly. Ragnarok continued down the list. Ravenclaw, a distant but unbroken line, carrying intellectual enhancement and the right of access to Rowena Ravenclaw's private library, which is stored in the Department of Mysteries and has not been opened in 3 centuries. For Founders, Harry said. 5 bloodlines from the Founders' era, Ragnarok corrected. You also carry a trace of Hufflepuff descent, though it is far enough removed to be peripheral. Nevertheless, it registers, and it carries with it certain loyalty-based magical resonances that are, he paused, quite interesting in combination with your other inheritances. He continued. Merlin, I'm going to need a moment, Harry said. Ragnarok paused. Harry breathed. The room was very quiet. Outside, he was distantly aware of the bank going about its morning business, of carts rattling somewhere far below them, of the world continuing to spin without acknowledging that everything he thought he knew about himself had just been comprehensively rearranged. Okay, he said. Merlin. A descent through the Peveril line again, specifically through Antioch Peveril's lesser-known descendants. The Merlin bloodline carries the oldest known form of what is commonly called elemental magic, the ability to work magic without the mediation of a wand or a verbal component, drawing directly from environmental magical fields. It also carries an amplification effect on all other magical inheritances, meaning that when the blocks are removed, your other bloodlines will be operating at a Merlin-enhanced baseline. Meaning you will be considerably more powerful than any of them would individually suggest, Ragnarok said simply. Continuing. Le Fay, a separate line from Merlin, the Morgan Le Fay bloodline, which carries healing and transformation magic. Emrys, this is distinct from the Merlin line, carrying prophetic resonance and time sight in certain circumstances. Pendragon, which is, as in King Arthur, Harry said. As in the historical individual behind the mythological figure, yes. The Pendragon bloodline is heavily associated with authority magic, the ability to command obedience, to break false oaths, to compel truth in magical contracts, and to wield what the old texts call the right of High King, which is a formal magical authority over British magical territories that has not been exercised in 1500 years. The silence in the room had a different texture now. That's 11, Harry said. 12. Black, through your godfather Sirius Black, which is not a blood inheritance but a magical adoption inheritance triggered by the godfather bond, which under goblin law carries the same weight as blood lineage. This gives you the ancient and noble house of Black secondary political rights and some access to their warding knowledge. Ragnarok turned the parchment over. Selwyn, which is a very old line predating Hogwarts with particular elemental earth affinities. Longbottom, wait, Harry said sharply. Longbottom? A convergent line through your mother's extended ancestry. You and Neville Longbottom share a common bloodline ancestor roughly 6 generations back. The Longbottom inheritance that routes through your line carries different attributes than those in the main Longbottom family. It manifests here as enhanced natural magic and herbological attunement. Does Neville know? Whether Neville Longbottom has been informed of his own situation is a separate matter, Ragnarok said. However, I note that the Longbottom family vaults have not had an inheritance assessment in some years and this office has reason to believe the situation there bears examination. He folded his hands. The 15th bloodline is one we have listed in our records as Arcturus, not a person, but a magical lineage dating to pre-Roman magical Britain, associated with astronomical magic and star-based divination. It is genuinely ancient, and we were not aware any living person carried it. Harry sat with all of this for a long moment. The room was silent. Ragnarok watched him with those amber eyes and didn't try to fill the silence, which Harry appreciated more than he could have said. 11 of the 15 are blocked, Harry said at last. 11 are blocked completely. 3 are partially blocked. Only Potter is unblocked, which is why the magical world has always experienced you as simply a Potter, powerful, yes, but not remarkably so. Without the blocks, the full picture is considerably different. Can the blocks be removed? Yes. The process is not simple, and it will not be painless, I will not lie to you about that. It requires a 3-part ritual conducted here in Gringotts under goblin oversight, the use of several very old and quite expensive magical compounds, and your full consent and cooperation. It will take approximately 4 hours. At the end of it, you will feel different. He paused, considering. Considerably different. When can we do it? Ragnarok looked at him steadily. You understand what this means. Once removed, the blocks cannot be replaced. You will be the most magically significant individual born in this country in approximately 1500 years. People will react to that. Albus Dumbledore will react to that. I know, Harry said. And you are not concerned? Harry thought about 4:30 mornings and cold breakfasts left on purpose and a cupboard under the stairs and 11 years of being told he was nothing by people who were afraid of exactly what they were hiding. He thought about Dumbledore's carefully constructed portrait of him, the orphan boy, the humble hero, the instrument. He thought about 15 lines of inheritance pulsing in his blood like music someone had spent years trying to make him unable to hear. I'm not concerned about Dumbledore, he said. Something moved in Ragnarok's expression. Not quite a smile, he didn't seem like a smiling creature, but something that was its functional equivalent. A sharpening of satisfaction. Good, the director said. Then there is one more thing we must discuss before the ritual. The matter of the block's origin, and what Gringotts intends to do about it. He opened a second folder, this one thicker, bound in dark red leather. Gringotts is, among other things, a legal institution. Under wizarding law, which derives in part from the Goblin Commerce Accords of 1378, the deliberate suppression of a client's magical inheritance without their consent, or in the case of a minor, without the consent of their magical guardian, constitutes theft of magical property. This is a serious crime. More significantly, it is a crime that was committed against a client of this bank. He let that sit for a moment. Gringotts takes crimes against its clients extremely seriously. What does that mean practically? Harry asked. It means that Gringotts is prepared to support any legal action you choose to take regarding the blocks, their origin, and their consequences. It means that our legal department, which is, I can assure you, considerably more formidable than the ministry's, is at your disposal. It means that we will provide authenticated copies of today's assessment, signed by myself, witnessed by 3 senior account managers, and sealed with the Gringotts institutional seal, which carries the weight of irrefutable evidence in both wizarding and goblin legal proceedings. Harry looked at the red folder. And in exchange? Ragnarok's expression shifted to something that was, unmistakably, approval. You ask the right questions, he said. In exchange, we ask 2 things. First, that you conduct all your financial business exclusively through Gringotts for the duration of your minor years, and give us right of first refusal on your accounts when you reach majority. Second, he paused. That you remember this conversation. That you remember who came to you honestly when others did not. Done, Harry said immediately. He hadn't needed to think about it. The ritual was nothing like what Harry had imagined. He had half expected something dramatic and theatrical, candles, incantations, possibly something catching fire. Instead, Ragnarok led him deeper into the bank, down 3 elevator shafts and along 2 corridors that seemed to move slightly each time Harry looked away, into a circular chamber whose walls were covered entirely in carved runes that he couldn't read but could somehow feel, like a conversation happening just below the frequency of hearing. 4 goblins he hadn't met before were already there, standing at cardinal points around a stone plinth in the center of the room. They were older than Gripknot, dressed in ceremonial attire that looked like it had survived several centuries with the help of very good preservation charms, and none of them introduced themselves. They simply looked at Harry, looked at Ragnarok, and inclined their heads. Ragnarok spoke to them briefly in gobbledygook, a sharp, precise exchange that felt more like a surgical briefing than a conversation, and then turned back to Harry. Remove your jacket. Roll up your sleeves. Lie on the plinth. You will not be restrained, but I recommend staying still. Moving will not harm you, but it will prolong the process. Harry did as he was told. The stone plinth was cold and utterly flat, and the ceiling above him was carved with more runes that spiraled outward from a central point like a magical galaxy, endlessly complex, and looking at them gave him a strange, slow feeling of recognition, as though he was reading his own name in a language he hadn't known he spoke. The 4 goblins began to chant. Not loudly, quietly, almost under their breath, a low rhythmic sound that blended with the hum of the room's magic until it was impossible to tell where voice ended and stone began. Ragnar stood at Harry's right shoulder. The first layer will feel like cold water, he said. The second will feel like pressure. The third, he paused, the third will feel like something you forgot you were carrying. The first layer was indeed cold, a rushing cold that started in his palms and moved inward, dissolving something he'd never noticed was there, and as it dissolved Harry felt the world become approximately 10% brighter without any lights changing. Colors deepened. The hum of the room's magic became a melody he could almost follow. The second layer was pressure, a building tightness in his chest that built and built until he thought something would crack, and then it released all at once with a sound that wasn't in the room but was somehow in Harry, a sound like a vault door swinging open, and suddenly he could feel his blood in a way he never had before, not painfully, not like an injury, but like a current that had always been flowing and had just been shown its proper channel. The third layer was the one Ragnar had paused before describing. It felt like putting down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd stopped knowing it was there. It came off in layers, 11 layers, each one dissolving with a sensation between grief and relief that Harry could not have named if his life depended on it. Each one took something away that had been pressing inward for his entire life, and as each one went, the world got bigger. Not visually. Not even magically, exactly. But in the way that a room gets bigger when you move out the furniture that was always blocking the light. When the last block released, Harry lay on the cold stone and looked up at the spiraling ceiling and felt completely, comprehensively, terrifyingly himself for the first time in his memory. He sat up slowly. His hands were glowing faintly, a soft, layered light, gold and silver and something darker that had no good color name. It faded as he watched, absorbed back into his skin. Ragnar was watching him from the side. The 4 ceremonial goblins had stopped chanting and were looking at the rune walls, where several previously dark carvings were now faintly lit. "How do you feel?" Ragnar asked. Harry thought about it seriously. "Like I finally woke up," he said. "Yes," Ragnar said. "That is usually how it goes." He extended a hand, not a handshake, but palm up, holding a small amulet on a black cord. The amulet was a flat disc of black stone carved with a simplified version of the key and coin seal from the letter. This identifies you as a Gringotts registered ward client with full legal protections. If anyone attempts to place a tracking charm, monitoring enchantment, or compulsion on you, this will alert me directly. Wear it. Harry took it and put it on without hesitation. They returned to the assessment room. On the table, alongside the original parchment, there was now a second document, heavier, official, bearing Ragnar's seal in black wax. Harry read it carefully. It was a formal certification of the inheritance assessment, the block's discovery, the block's removal, and the estimated magical and legal value of what had been suppressed. That last number was written in a unit Harry didn't recognize, but the notation beside it read, equivalent in human legal terms, theft of heritage and magical suppression, Class A, with intent, maximum civil penalty under Wizarding Law 1689 applies. "What do I do with this?" Harry asked. "That," Ragnar said, settling back into his chair with the patience of a creature who had spent centuries watching the world move through its paces, "is entirely up to you. You could do nothing. You could file it quietly with the Ministry, where it would likely be buried, given Dumbledore's current influence there. You could present it to the Wizengamot, where it would be harder to bury but still possible to delay. Or," he tapped the table once with one long finger. "You could use it as the first piece of a considerably larger argument." "What larger argument?" "Albus Dumbledore currently holds 3 institutional positions of significant power," Ragnar said. "Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. An Order of Merlin, First Class, which is not an institutional position but carries significant social authority and is tied to several legal privileges. Each of these positions has conditions attached to them. Codes of conduct. Legal requirements." He paused. Requirements which, in light of today's findings, he would appear to have violated considerably. Harry felt something settle in him, not anger, exactly. Something colder and more purposeful than anger. Something that knew which direction it was pointing. "Walk me through it," he said. Ragnarok almost smiled. The chief warlock of the Wisingamot is required, under the Judicial Conduct Act of 1891, to have no undisclosed conflicts of interest with any individual over whom the Wisingamot has jurisdiction. As your magical guardian, a role he assumed without your knowledge or consent, he has been simultaneously acting as your legal custodian and the presiding judge of the institution that would hear any complaint about your treatment. That is a disqualifying conflict of interest. The Order of Merlin requires that the recipient have not engaged in acts harmful to the magical heritage of a British citizen, which the suppression of 15 bloodlines rather clearly violates. And the Supreme Mugwump position requires full compliance with ICW regulations on magical rights, which include several specific provisions about the magical autonomy of minor children. Ragnarok folded his hands. "We have already drafted the formal filings. We were waiting for your consent to send them." Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere in the depths of Diagon Alley, a clock was chiming the hour. "You've been building this case," Harry said slowly. "Before I came in today. We have been monitoring your account since the age of 15 months, Ragnarok said. "When the blocks were placed, our instruments registered them. We could not act without your consent, and you were a minor with a compromised magical guardian. We could not petition the court without your agreement, and we had no legal standing to reach you directly until today." He paused. "Your 11th birthday is the earliest point at which Goblin law recognizes a magical child's right to independent legal action." "You've been waiting 10 years, Harry said. "We are a patient people," Ragnarok said, and this time there was definitely something that was the functional equivalent of a smile. "Send the filings." Harry picked up the Gringotts pen from the edge of the table. It was heavier than a normal quill, brass-tipped, and signed his name at the bottom of each document with a steadiness that surprised him. "Harry James Potter." Each letter clean and certain. "Send them," he said. Ragnarok took the documents, passed them to Gripknot, and said something in gobbledygook that Harry didn't understand but which sounded efficient and final. Gripknot left the room at a pace that was technically still walking. "One more thing," Ragnarok said. "Your vaults." Harry looked up. "The Potter Vault, which you visited with Hagrid, is your trust vault, the portion set aside for your use during your school years. You are aware of it." He opened the red folder again. "You are not aware of the full Potter Estate Vault, which has been in a sealed state since your parents' deaths. You are not aware of the Peveril Vault, which is technically the oldest active vault in this bank and has not been opened in 60 years. You are not aware of the Gryffindor Vault. There's a Gryffindor Vault," Harry said. "There are vaults for all 4 founders," Ragnarok said. "Though access to them requires bloodline verification, which you have now completed. The Gryffindor Vault is accessible to you immediately. The Slytherin Vault is technically also accessible to you, which will be interesting." "And the Peveril Vault?" "The Peveril Vault," Ragnarok said carefully, "contains things we have not catalogued because we have not been permitted inside. The vault responds only to its heir. Now that your blocks are removed, it will open for you." He stood, straightening his jacket. "Shall we?" The Peveril Vault was at the deepest level of the bank, deeper even than the high-security vaults Harry had passed on that first trip with Hagrid, deeper than the levels marked with warning signs in both English and gobbledygook, deeper than anywhere Harry had expected. The cart that carried them moved differently at this level, slower, as though the rails were older and required more care. The door of the vault was black stone, seamless, with no visible handle or lock. When Harry stepped in front of it, it did not open immediately. He felt it considering him the way an old house considers whether to let you in, not a security check, more like a recognition. Then something ancient and patient in the stone turned over and decided, and the door opened without sound, swinging inward on perfect hinges that had been waiting a very long time for this moment. The vault was vast. The floor was covered not in galleons but in books, thousands of them, stacked and shelved in dark wood cases that lined every wall from floor to ceiling. There were chests of magical objects, carefully labeled in old script. There was a weapons rack holding 3 swords, 2 staves, and something that looked like a simple black cloak folded over a hook. There was a pedestal in the center of the room holding a stone that seemed to have its own gravitational field, pulling the eye toward it. And on a separate small table, held upright in a display stand, was a wand. An elder wand. Harry knew what he was looking at. He'd heard the stories, or the fragments of stories that had survived being called fairy tales. He'd always assumed they were metaphors. The Deathly Hallows, Harry said. The original 3, Ragnarok said from behind him, and his voice was quieter now, carrying a weight it hadn't had upstairs. The cloak you carry already, the invisibility cloak given to you by Dumbledore before your first year. What Gringotts records as having been removed from this vault and placed with Dumbledore for safekeeping shortly after your parents' deaths, without any recorded authorization to do so. Harry turned to look at him. Another item removed from this vault without authorization, Ragnarok said, and the phrase without authorization carried everything it needed to carry. Harry turned back to the vault. He walked to the cloak first and lifted it from its hook. It fell over his hand like cool water, impossibly light, and the air around it shimmered. He folded it carefully and tucked it inside his jacket. He walked to the stone on its pedestal. It was small and dark and intensely, overwhelmingly heavy with whatever it contained. He wrapped it in a piece of cloth from one of the shelves, velvet, dark blue, old, and pocketed it. He stood in front of the elder wand for a long time. It belongs to you by right of blood, Ragnarok said quietly from the door. I know, Harry said. But I don't think I need it yet. He looked at it for another moment, then turned away. Not yet. There were certain things that could wait. The wand was one of them. The books were another, thousands of them, a literal library of his heritage, and there would be time for those. He noted the chests, the labeled artifacts, the genealogical records stacked in one corner. There was a lifetime of knowledge in this vault, possibly more. He'd come back. Repeatedly. I want a full inventory, Harry said. Everything in this vault. Everything in the Potter Estate vault and the Gryffindor vault. I want it documented, catalogued, and cross-referenced with anything that's been reported missing, borrowed, or transferred out without a record of my authorization. That will take some time, Ragnarok said. That's fine, Harry said. I'm patient. The corner of Ragnarok's mouth moved. Back upstairs, in the fading light of mid-morning, Harry sat in the assessment room with a cup of tea that Gripknot had produced from somewhere and read through the full list of his inheritances again while Ragnarok worked in silence across the table. The filings had been sent. The documents were sealed, authenticated, delivered. Somewhere in Wizarding Britain, a clerk was receiving papers that were going to append several very carefully constructed power structures, and the man at the center of those structures was going to read a very official document and know, with certainty, with no room for maneuvering, that Harry Potter had been to Gringotts and that Gringotts had not been pleased with what it found. Harry sipped his tea and felt the 15 currents of his inheritance moving in him, each distinct, each settling into its proper place, and thought about September 1st and Hogwarts and a headmaster who had spent 10 years building a version of Harry Potter that was humble and grateful and entirely manageable. He thought about what it was going to feel like when that headmaster looked at him for the first time since this morning. Harry set his cup down and, for the first time in his memory, smiled in a way that had absolutely nothing nervous in it. "Director Ragnarok," he said. The old goblin looked up. "Thank you," Harry said. "For waiting." Ragnarok held his gaze for a moment. "Don't waste it," he said. It was, Harry thought, exactly the right thing to say. He pocketed the authenticated documents, tucked the 2 Hallows into secured places about his person, and walked back out through the marble halls of Gringotts, past the industrious rows of goblins, through the silver doors, through the brass, and out into the warm summer morning of Diagon Alley. The world looked the same as it had an hour ago. Harry Potter was not. Chapter 2, Titles Fall Like Crowns. The Owl arrived at the Ministry of Magic at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning, which was not, in itself, unusual. The ministry received hundreds of owls daily: complaints, inquiries, filings, requests, the endless administrative correspondence of a bureaucracy that had been generating paperwork since before the printing press existed. The owls came and went through a dedicated arrival chamber on the 4th floor, sorted by enchanted brass trays that directed each letter to its appropriate department with a reliability that the rest of the ministry's systems could only dream of achieving. This owl was different in 3 ways. First, it was a Gringotts owl, identifiable by the black plumage, the brass leg bands stamped with the Key-Coin seal, and the air of institutional authority that goblin-trained messenger birds seemed to absorb simply by living near the bank. Gringotts owls did not get lost, did not get delayed, and did not accept refusal of delivery. The enchanted brass tray sorted them into a separate category entirely. Second, there were not 1 but 7 of these owls, arriving simultaneously, each carrying an identical document packet sealed in black wax, each addressed to a different recipient. The Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The International Confederation of Wizards, British Office. The Order of Merlin Oversight Committee. The Daily Prophet. The Wizengamot Administrative Office. And, notably, one addressed simply to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Headmaster, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Third, 2 of the owls had already delivered their packets before anyone at the ministry thought to wonder whether perhaps someone should check what was in them. By the time the morning shift supervisor in the owl room thought to send a memo upstairs, the prophet's copy was already in the hands of a junior reporter named Miranda Fox, who had been having a slow morning and whose editor was going to have a very animated reaction to what she was currently reading. Harry didn't know about any of this yet. He was in Diagon Alley, eating a meat pie from a small bakery near the entrance to Nocturne Alley, and making a list. The list was written on the back of a Gringotts deposit slip in a small, precise hand, and it covered several categories. Things to do immediately. Things to do before September. Things that required patience and a longer game. At the top of the immediate list, underlined twice, was, get school supplies. Get proper robes. Don't let anyone measure my head for anything. He'd had enough of people deciding what size he was. The second item was, find out about Sirius Black. He'd asked Ragnarok about it before leaving. The director had been characteristically precise in his response. Sirius Black had been imprisoned in Azkaban without trial in November 1981, which was illegal under Wizengamot Judicial Procedures Act 1843, and the Gringotts Legal Department had included a notation about the irregularity in the filings sent to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement this morning. Whether that notation would be acted on depended heavily on who opened the envelope and whether they were brave enough or corrupt enough to either pursue it or bury it. Harry had asked what he could do about it. Ragnarok had said, at 11 years old, limited. At 12, with sufficient legal precedent established, considerably more. Build your position first. Harry was building. He was also 11 years old, sitting on a barrel outside a bakery eating a meat pie, and the morning sun was warm on his face, and for the first time he could remember, the world didn't feel like something happening to him. It felt like something he was in, actively, with both feet. He finished the pie, folded the list into his pocket, and went to buy his school things. He bought robes first, not from Madame Malkin's, where he had a feeling Dumbledore's monitoring network had a particular fondness for noting the comings and goings of notable students. He went to a smaller tailor 3 shops down, a quiet woman named Adelaide who measured him with the tape and looked at him with the professional assessment of someone who had been making wizard robes for 40 years and could tell at a glance what a person actually needed. Quality wool, Harry said. Not school uniform gray. I know what the required items are, but beyond that, proper robes. Things that'll last. She had looked at him with a slight revision of her initial estimate and said, right. Sit down. He walked out an hour later with 4 sets of proper robes, 2 everyday and 2 formal, in deep blue and dark green that brought out a brightness in his eyes he'd never noticed before because he'd never had clothes that fit properly. They were folded in a bag that Adelaide had charmed to be light regardless of contents, and Harry put them away in the moleskin pouch that had been in the Potter vault, small enough to hang inside his shirt, large enough inside to hold whatever he needed. Flourish and blots for the books, where he bought everything on the Hogwarts list and then stood in the back section, the section with the older texts, the ones with no pictures in them, the ones that most 11-year-olds found either boring or intimidating, and selected 6 additional volumes. A History of the Founders. A comprehensive genealogical record of British magical families published in 1923. A legal text on wizarding inheritance law. A primer on wandless magic theory that was so old the spine was held together by a charm rather than glue. He also bought, on an impulse that felt less like impulse and more like instinct, a slim book with a plain dark cover titled The Accords of Goblin Commerce, 1378, an annotated translation. He'd be needing to understand exactly what Ragnarok could and couldn't do on his behalf. He was back on the main street of Diagon Alley when he heard his name. Not from an adult, not from a ministry official, not from anyone he needed to be particularly careful about. From a girl, approximately his age, standing outside Flourish and Blots with a book already open in one hand and an expression of pure intellectual recognition on her face, as though she'd just found the answer to something she'd been working on. "You're Harry Potter," she said. Not breathlessly, not reverently, just with the tone of someone completing a pattern. She had brown hair pulled back practically, dark eyes that moved with rapid assessment, and was wearing the kind of expression that Harry was already beginning to categorize as "this person wants to have a conversation that is worth having." "I am," he said. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said. "I'm also starting Hogwarts in September. I've read all the textbooks already and 2/3 of Hogwarts, a history, and I was wondering," she glanced at the bag in his hand with the kind of focus usually reserved for academic rivals, "what are those additional books? They're not on the list." "I know," Harry said. "That's why I bought them." She looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating. "Which ones?" He told her. She went very still when he mentioned the wandless magic primer, and the brief flash of delight that crossed her face before she could suppress it was entirely genuine. "Where did you find that?" she said. "I've been looking for a primary source on pre-wand British magic for 2 weeks and the man behind the counter told me they didn't stock anything that old." "Back left corner," Harry said. "Behind the divination section where nobody looks." She was already moving. "Wait there," she said, over her shoulder, and vanished into the shop. Harry waited. He was mildly interested in being waited for rather than doing the waiting, for once. She came back out 4 minutes later with the wandless magic primer and 2 other books he hadn't seen, a text on magical theory and something in Latin whose title he couldn't read. She was tucking them into her bag with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times. "There's a cafe," Harry said. "Around the corner. Do you want to?" He stopped. He wasn't entirely sure what he was offering. He'd never had a friend his own age. He wasn't sure what the protocol was. Hermione saved him the trouble. "Yes," she said simply, and fell into step beside him, already opening one of her new books. She was, Harry thought, extremely easy to be around. The cafe was called Merryweather's and it had been there since 1834, which was stated clearly on a plaque beside the door, and the plaque looked like it genuinely meant it. The interior was warm wood and comfortable chairs and the particular quiet of a place where people came to read rather than to be seen. They took a corner table. Harry ordered tea. Hermione ordered tea and a scone and immediately opened the wandless magic primer, then immediately closed it again, because she had apparently decided that conversation came first. "You bought books on inheritance law," she said. "And Goblin Commerce Accords." "I did. Can I ask why?" Harry considered her. She was watching him with that rapid, assessing look, and there was nothing performing about it. She wasn't trying to appear intelligent, she simply was, and she wanted to know things because she wanted to know things, not for any other reason. He'd been surrounded his whole life by people with ulterior motives dressed as kindness, and the absence of that was noticeable. "I had a meeting at Gringotts this morning," he said. I found some things out about my inheritance that I'm going to need to understand properly. The law. The history. All of it. What kinds of things? She asked. He thought about it. Big things, he said. Things that are going to change a lot. She held his gaze. Are you in trouble? No, he said, with a certainty that surprised him slightly. I think the opposite, actually. She nodded, accepting this with the pragmatism of someone who understood that people were entitled to their own timelines with information. All right, she said. Well, if you need someone to read the legal texts and flag the relevant sections, I'm good at that. I'm good at research generally. I might take you up on that, Harry said. She nodded again and opened her primer, and they sat in companionable silence while the tea came and the morning advanced, and it was the most comfortable Harry had ever felt with another human being outside of Hagrid, which was something he noted and filed away. He was halfway through his first cup of tea when the door of the cafe opened and a wizard he didn't recognize came in, heading for the counter, and Harry noticed that the man was holding a copy of the Daily Prophet with an expression somewhere between bewildered and electrified. Harry caught a glimpse of the headline. He paid for the tea, bought a prophet from the rack by the door, and sat back down. The headline read, Gringotts files formal complaint, Dumbledore accused of heritage suppression. Gringotts Wizarding Bank released a statement this morning confirming that a formal legal filing has been submitted to the Wizengamot, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and the International Confederation of Wizards regarding what it terms, deliberate and documented suppression of a British magical heir's bloodline inheritance. The filing, understood to relate to a minor child whose identity Gringotts is legally obligated to protect, alleges Class A heritage theft and cites evidence of multiple prohibited magical enchantments placed without consent. The bank has named Headmaster Albus Dumbledore as the individual whose magical signature was identified in the enchantments. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement has confirmed receipt of the filing and states that an inquiry has been opened. Dumbledore was unavailable for comment at time of publication. Harry set the paper down. Hermione, who had been watching his face rather than her book for the past 30 seconds, said nothing, which he appreciated. The big things, she said, after a moment. Yes, he said. She reached over and read the headline. Harry watched her read it. Watched the comprehension move through her expression, not shock, exactly, more like the expression of someone who has been given a piece of a puzzle they already suspected existed. Harry, she said. Yes. Is that you? The minor child? Yes. She set the paper down. Looked at him directly. Are you all right? It was, he thought, a remarkably good question, because the more common response would have been something about Dumbledore, or something about what it meant, or something about the legal implications. The fact that her first question was whether he was all right said something about her that he filed away alongside the other things he was collecting about Hermione Granger. I'm better than I've been in a long time, he said honestly. She nodded once, with decision. Then we should probably read the legal text together, she said. Because whatever comes next, you should understand exactly what the law says before it happens. Agreed, Harry said, and pulled the inheritance law book out of his bag. The morning deepened into afternoon while they worked through the legal text, Hermione flagging pages with strips of parchment sheet produced from her bag with the efficiency of a person who carried emergency annotation equipment as a matter of course. Harry read carefully and asked questions that were specific and practical, and Hermione answered them with citations and counter-citations that he wrote down and would later verify through Ragnarok. The short version of what the law said was this: Heritage Theft Class A carried a mandatory hearing before the full Wizengamot, the evidence being provided by Gringotts being admissible as irrefutable under the Goblin Commerce Accords, which was why Harry had bought that book, and which Hermione had to admit was a considerably clever purchase. And the penalty upon conviction included stripping of all institutional positions, financial reparations calculated by a formula Harry couldn't work out yet, and a period of magical restriction for the perpetrator. The problem, Hermione said, tapping her quill against her lips in thought, is the hearing itself. The chief warlock presides over Wizengamot hearings. He can't preside over his own hearing, Harry said. Right, but who convenes the hearing and removes him before it? That's a chicken and egg problem. Someone on the Wisengamot has to call for the removal, a formal motion of censure, which requires. She flipped pages. 15 signatures from full Wisengamot members. And Dumbledore has been chief warlock for 25 years. He has allies. Harry leaned back in his chair. Who are the old family heads on the Wisengamot? Hermione already had the genealogical text open to the relevant section. She was, Harry thought, almost supernaturally efficient. The ancient and noble houses each have an hereditary seat. The Longbottom family. The Bones family, Amelia Bones, she's head of the DMLE, actually. Abbott. Greengrass. Davis. Several others. She paused. Black has a seat, but it's been vacant since Sirius Black was imprisoned. Which brings me to another thing, Harry said. She looked at him. Sirius Black was imprisoned without trial, Harry said. That's also in the filing. Ragnarok told me the Gringotts legal team included a notation about it. Hermione stared at him. Without a trial, she said flatly. Without a trial. That's a fundamental violation of. She grabbed the legal text and started flipping with agitated speed. That's Judicial Procedures Act 1843, Section 3, every individual accused of a crime has the right to trial before the full Wisengamot unless, she stopped. Read. Unless the Minister for Magic invokes emergency powers under wartime conditions. Which Bagnall did in 1981 during the First War, which means it was technically legal at the time, but the emergency powers lapsed in 1983 when the war was formally declared over, and at that point the Ministry was required to review all wartime detentions. She looked up. They clearly didn't. No, Harry said. They clearly didn't. She set the book down with the controlled motion of someone who was very angry and expressing it through precision. So he's been in Azkaban for 10 years for a crime he may not have even been tried for. He's my godfather, Harry said quietly. The silence at the table changed texture. Oh, Harry, Hermione said, and it was the first time she'd said his name with anything other than information exchange efficiency, and the warmth in it was so uncomplicated that it hit somewhere Harry hadn't realized was sore. We'll fix that. That one, we can fix. The legal precedent is clear. If they failed to review the wartime detentions after 1983, the imprisonment is retroactively illegal and he's entitled to immediate release and trial. Can we file that too? Through Gringotts. She thought about it. Gringotts can file the evidence of the flawed imprisonment, but the actual motion for release would need to come from someone with standing. She paused. You, as his godson and magical ward, have standing. But you're 11. How does that change things legally? She was already reading again. It means you need a magical advocate. An adult who can represent your interests in legal proceedings before you reach majority. She looked up. Ragnarok mentioned this? He said Gringotts couldn't act without my consent, but he also said there were limits to what I could do at this age. He didn't mention a magical advocate specifically. It's in Chapter 7, Hermione said. I found it while you were looking at the inheritance section. A minor child who has been determined to have had their magical guardianship compromised, which you clearly have, given the filing, can petition for the appointment of an independent magical advocate through the Wisengamot. Except the Wisengamot is. She grimaced. Compromised. Because of Dumbledore. So go around the Wisengamot, Harry said. She blinked. How? Harry pulled out the Goblin Commerce Accords text. The ICW. The International Confederation of Wizards received one of Gringotts' filings this morning. The ICW operates independently of the Wisengamot and has jurisdiction over cases involving violations of the International Magical Rights of Children Charter, which, he flipped to a page he'd marked earlier. Which includes the right of magical heritage and the right to independent guardianship in cases of documented guardian misconduct. He looked at her. The ICW can appoint an independent advocate without the Wisengamot's involvement. Hermione stared at him for a long, silent moment. "You're 11, she said. "I'm very well read for 11, Harry said. She burst out laughing, a genuine laugh, sudden and bright, completely different from her usual composed effect, and Harry grinned because it turned out that making Hermione Granger actually laugh was a remarkably satisfying thing to have achieved. "All right," she said, when she'd recovered. "ICW petition. Who do we send it to?" "Ragnarok will know," Harry said. "He's been doing this longer than either of us." They were still in the cafe when the second wave of the morning's reaction arrived, and it arrived in the form of a short, round woman in ministry robes who came through the door with the energy of someone who had been redirected 3 times and was not going to be redirected a 4th time. She scanned the room, found Harry, and came over with a directness that Harry recognized as the particular movement of someone who had made a decision and was committed to it. "Harry Potter," she said. "Not a question. I'm Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement." She was 50-ish, square-jawed, wearing a monocle that she'd clearly forgotten she was still wearing because she'd been in too much of a hurry to take it off. Her expression was the professional neutral of someone who had learned to manage their own reactions over many years, but underneath it something was alert and measuring. Harry stood, because it seemed like the right thing to do, and offered his hand. "Ma'am." She shook it briskly and sat down without being invited, which Harry didn't mind because it was clearly her natural mode. She glanced at Hermione with a questioning look. "Hermione Granger," Hermione said. "I'm helping with the legal research." Amelia Bones looked at the stack of law texts on the table, looked at Harry, and something in her expression underwent a slight recalibration. "I see." She folded her hands on the table. "Mr. Potter, I received the Gringotts filing this morning. I want you to know that I have opened a formal inquiry, which means the DMLE is legally obligated to pursue this regardless of any pressure from other quarters." "I appreciate that," Harry said. "I'm not here to be thanked," she said. "I'm here because there's a detail in that filing that concerns me beyond the headline issue, and I need to know how far you intend to take this." "All the way," Harry said. She studied him. "You're 11 years old." "So I keep being told," Harry said. "Does that change what the law says?" A pause. Then, with what might have been a hint of satisfaction behind the professional neutral, "No. It doesn't." She leaned forward slightly. "The serious black notation. The Gringotts filing includes a notation about the irregularity of his imprisonment." "Yes. The ministry did fail to conduct the mandatory 1983 review," she said, and she said it the way someone says something they have known for some time and have been looking for the right context to say out loud. "I became head of the DMLE in 1989. I found the file in 1990 and recommended a review be conducted. The recommendation was," she paused, choosing her word with care, "declined." "By who?" Harry asked. "By the minister's office," she said. "Which at the time was operating under advisement from the chief warlock." She held his gaze. "I kept my documentation. Every memo. Every recommendation. Every note of every declined request." A pause. "I kept it in a personal safe outside ministry premises, just in case." Harry looked at her steadily. "In case of what, exactly?" "In case," she said, "someone showed up who could actually do something with it." The 3 of them sat with that for a moment. "I need an independent magical advocate," Harry said. "Someone with legal standing who can represent my interests in proceedings before I reach majority. Someone the ICW can formally recognize." She considered this. "I'm not in a position to act as your advocate directly. The DMLE's inquiry creates a formal relationship that would be legally complicated to combine with advocacy. But there is someone." She paused. "Arcturus Black. Sirius Black's grandfather. He is still alive, still holds the head of house position for the Black family, and as a result of you carrying the black inheritance, which I assume is in the Gringotts documentation, he would have grounds to act as your magical advocate under house law. She paused. He also has no particular fondness for Dumbledore. Harry filed that away. And the ICW petition? She looked at the Goblin Commerce Accord's text on the table with an expression that was entirely readable for anyone who knew how to look at it, pure professional appreciation. Who told you about the ICW pathway? I read it, Harry said. He actually read it, Hermione confirmed, with a trace of pride that she probably didn't realize was there. Amelia Bones stood, smoothed her robes, and put her business card on the table with the precise motion of a woman who had done exactly what she came to do. Send the ICW petition through Gringotts. I will make sure the right person at the British ICW office receives it and doesn't lose it. And Mr. Potter, she paused at the table's edge. Whatever else you need documented from the DMLE's files, come to me directly. Not through the normal channels. Why? Harry asked, not challenging, genuinely asking. She looked at him with something that was no longer entirely the professional neutral. Because I've been waiting for someone to reopen this since 1990, she said simply. And you seem rather better equipped for it than anyone I expected. She left the same way she'd arrived, with total directness and no wasted motion. Hermione let out a slow breath. Well, she said. Yes, Harry agreed. Do you attract allies like this normally, or is today unusual? I've been alive for 11 years, Harry said. I think today is fairly unusual. They parted ways at the entrance to Diagon Alley late in the afternoon, Hermione with the wandless magic primer and the addresses of 2 law libraries that she'd extracted from Amelia Bones' business card annotation, Harry with his bag of books, his school supplies, the 2 Hallows, and a day that felt like it had lasted approximately a decade. He stopped at the Leaky Cauldron long enough to get directions back to Little Whinging. He'd left his Gringotts escort that morning with no plan for a return journey, which in retrospect had been an oversight, and was waiting for the public flu connection when the barman, Tom, turned the radio up slightly to catch a broadcast. Ministry sources have confirmed that the Wisingamot Administrative Office has received a formal notification of potential judicial conduct violation against Chief Warlock Albus Dumbledore. The office has declined to comment on what this means for the Chief Warlock's position pending the completion of the DMLE inquiry. In related news, several members of the Wisingamot have been contacted by reporters today, and at least 3 have confirmed they have received the Gringotts filings directly and are reviewing their contents. Supreme Mugwump Dumbledore's seat on the ICW has not yet been addressed. Tom turned to Harry with the expression of a man who had seen a lot of things in his years behind this bar and was mildly astonished by today. Quite a morning, he said. Yes, Harry agreed. You look familiar, Tom said, squinting at him. I get that sometimes, Harry said, and stepped into the flue. He was back at Privet Drive by 6. Uncle Vernon was in the sitting room watching the evening news. Aunt Petunia was in the kitchen with that particular tight set to her shoulders that meant something had disrupted her day. Dudley was upstairs. The house had the atmosphere of people who had been waiting to be angry about something all day and hadn't yet found the right moment. Harry came in through the back door, put his bag in his room, and washed his hands. He was downstairs making himself a sandwich when Uncle Vernon appeared in the kitchen doorway. Where have you been? Vernon said. Not quite a question. London, Harry said. He found the bread. All day. All day. He found the butter. That creature took you, Vernon said. At 7 this morning. In front of the neighbors. Some of them saw. Harry turned around. He looked at his uncle, the purple face, the walrus mustache, the small eyes that had always managed to carry both bluster and something he was now recognizing, from a different angle, as a specific kind of fear. Uncle Vernon, Harry said, with a conversational mildness that was somehow more effective than raised voices, I'd like to explain something to you about how things are going to be different from now on. Vernon's eyes narrowed. Is that, I'm going to Hogwarts in September, Harry said. Between now and then, I'll need to make several more trips to London, and I'll need to be out sometimes on short notice, and I'll need my trunk in my room and not in the attic. I'll continue doing reasonable things around the house because that's fair. I won't be sleeping in the cupboard anymore. I have the second bedroom and I intend to use it properly." He paused. "I also have some reading to do, so I'd appreciate if I wasn't disturbed in the evenings." Vernon had gone red. "Now you listen here, I should also tell you," Harry said, "that Gringotts Wizarding Bank is currently aware of my living arrangements and has, as of this morning, flagged my address under their client welfare protocols. The goblins have some views on how their clients should be treated. You don't want them to develop stronger ones." He wasn't bluffing, exactly. It was more that the goblins actually did have views on client welfare, and the amulet around his neck was actually monitoring for unauthorized enchantments, and Ragnarok had actually said to contact Gringotts if anything required their attention. He just hadn't specified what kinds of things. Vernon stared at him. Something moved through the bluster, a recognition that the variables had changed, that the boy in front of him was not the boy who'd gone out that morning, that whatever the nature of this change was, the calculations that had governed the past 11 years no longer added up. Harry turned back to his sandwich. After a long moment, Vernon left the kitchen without speaking. Harry ate his sandwich in peace and spent the evening reading the inheritance law text, making detailed notes in the margins in his precise, small hand, and planning. He had a legal battle to build, a godfather to free, and a headmaster who was about to discover that the boy he'd spent 11 years shaping into a willing instrument had just read the blueprint. He slept that night in the second bedroom, for the first time, in a proper bed, with his books stacked beside him and the weight of 15 inheritances settled in his blood like something that had always been waiting for room to breathe. Dumbledore, he was certain, had not slept at all. The formal notification arrived at Hogwarts by special owl courier at exactly 6 in the morning, bypassing the school's normal post entirely, delivered directly by a Gringotts bird that flew straight to the headmaster's tower and tapped on the window with the patience of something that would tap all day if necessary. Albus Dumbledore was already awake. He was standing at his window. He had been standing there since approximately 2 in the morning, which was when the first reports had reached him through his network of informants, looking out over the grounds with an expression that was, for once, perfectly unreadable, even to himself. He had the filing in his hand. He had read it 6 times. He had the certified assessment, the magical signature analysis, the legal citations, the Gringotts seal, and the names of everyone who had received copies, and he had spent the intervening hours doing what he did better than almost anyone alive, thinking 3 moves ahead, assessing damage, calculating options, and building a new architecture from whatever materials the situation still offered. The options were limited. They were not, however, zero. He could not deny the signatures. Gringotts' instruments were irrefutable, and he had known that when he placed the blocks, had known it as an accepted risk, had calculated that the assessment visit would never happen because he would ensure Harry received guidance about Gringotts that steered him toward the trust vault and away from the deeper assessment process. Someone had bypassed that steering. Someone had ensured Harry arrived at Gringotts on his birthday for a full assessment rather than a simple vault visit. He needed to know who. He also needed to shape the narrative, not suppress it, that ship had sailed, but shape it. He needed to be the first person to give Harry an explanation of why the blocks had been placed. He needed to do it in person, in a context where he controlled the environment, before Harry had been fully advised by people who didn't understand the full picture. He needed Harry to see him not as a villain but as a man who had made difficult choices for difficult reasons. He was very good at that conversation. He had given versions of it, in various forms, to various people over 90 years. He was, he knew, convincing. He sat down and picked up his quill. "Dear Harry, I understand you've had an eventful morning, and I think it's past time that we spoke properly, you and I, without intermediaries. There are things you deserve to know, and I would very much like to be the one to explain them to you. Please come to Hogwarts at your earliest convenience. I will make arrangements. Yours sincerely, Albus Dumbledore." He sealed it. Sent it. And then he sat very still for a moment, thinking about a boy with his mother's eyes, reading legal texts in Diagon Alley, and felt, for the first time in 90 years, something that was uncomfortably close to genuine uncertainty. Harry read the letter twice over breakfast. He thought about Ragnar's voice, before Harry had been fully advised by people who didn't understand the full picture. He thought about the word explain and what it meant from someone who had spent 11 years deciding what Harry would and wouldn't understand. He got out a piece of parchment and wrote back. Dear Professor Dumbledore, thank you for your letter. I look forward to speaking with you as well. However, I think it's better if we meet somewhere neutral. I'd suggest Gringotts, actually, since they have a vested interest in any conversation between us being properly documented. Please let me know if that works for your schedule. Harry Potter. He sealed it, gave it to Hedwig, and finished his toast. The reply came back within the hour. Harry, a Gringotts meeting would be unconventional. My office at Hogwarts would surely be more comfortable. I have the full picture, Harry, and I think you'll find. Harry didn't finish reading it. He wrote 3 words on a blank piece of parchment, folded it, and sent it back. Gringotts or nothing. The formal Wizengamot notification came on Thursday. It was delivered to every member of the Wizengamot simultaneously, which meant a coordinated owl dispatch that the administrative office had clearly spent 2 days preparing, and which landed on desks and breakfast tables and, in at least 2 cases, directly on the heads of wizards who had been sleeping late. The notification stated that pursuant to the Gringotts filing and the DMLE's opened inquiry, a formal motion of censure had been filed against Albus Dumbledore by 3 Wizengamot members. Harry didn't know which 3 yet, but Amelia Bones had been busy, and would come before the full body in session at the earliest available date. The notification also contained a secondary clause that Harry had asked Ragnar to ensure was included. Pursuant to the conflict of interest provisions of the Judicial Conduct Act 1891, Chief Warlock Albus Dumbledore is hereby formally notified that he may not preside over any Wizengamot session in which matters pertaining to his own conduct are under discussion. In his absence, the Deputy Chief Warlock, Tiberius Ogden, will preside. It was not a stripping of his title. Not yet. That required the full hearing and a vote. But it was the beginning of it. It was the lock turned, the door to the mechanism opened, the first formal acknowledgement by the institution itself that what Dumbledore had done was something the institution needed to look at. Harry read the notification in his room at Privet Drive and felt the shape of what was coming with the clarity of someone who had spent 4 days reading nothing but law and history. The Wizengamot would move slowly. The ICW would move slightly faster on the Mugwump question because the ICW was less politically entangled with Dumbledore directly. The Order of Merlin stripping would be the easiest. The Oversight Committee had received the filing and the criteria were clear and objective. He had estimated 2 weeks for the Order of Merlin, 6 weeks for the ICW position, and 3 to 4 months for the Chief Warlock question, barring acceleration. He wrote his estimate in his notes, then wrote underneath it, "Can we accelerate? What would need to happen for the hearing to move faster?" And started as a question for Ragnar. He was also thinking about September. About Hogwarts. About walking into a school that Dumbledore had run for 40 years, where the staff were loyal to him, where the systems had been built around his presence, where Harry had been expected to arrive as a humble, slightly awestruck orphan boy who was grateful for the opportunity. That version of him had been a construction. The blocks had been its scaffolding. Harry looked at his hands. The faint glow from the ritual was long gone, but sometimes, in certain lights, he thought he could see the faintest trace of layered color in the lines of his palm, all 15 of them, like a chord that was always playing, just below the range of ordinary hearing. He closed his hand. 3.5 weeks until September 1st. Plenty of time. Chapter 3, The library beneath the vault. The Peveril vault had a smell. Harry noticed it properly on his second visit, a combination of old paper and cold stone and something that had no mundane equivalent, the way the air in very old places carries the accumulated weight of everything that has happened in them. It was not unpleasant. It was, in fact, the smell of a place that had been waiting, and waiting patiently, and was now very glad to have someone in it again. He had come back 4 times in the 2 weeks since his birthday. Each time Ragnar had waved away the escort formalities with a gesture that said you know the way, and Harry did know the way, down through the bank's lower levels, past the security checkpoints where the goblins on duty had taken to nodding at him with the particular professional acknowledgement that meant we know who you are and we have assessed you as not a problem, all the way to the lowest corridor and the seamless black door that opened for him before he raised his hand. He had begun cataloging the library section on his third visit, working methodically left to right along the shelves, writing titles and apparent subjects in a leather-bound notebook that had been in the Potter estate vault. The library was larger than it looked from the doorway. The vault itself seemed to have a spatial extension enchantment, old enough that he couldn't identify the specific spell, which meant the shelves continued back considerably further than the physical walls should have allowed. He had stopped being surprised by things like that. Today he was looking for something specific. He had a question that had been building for 2 weeks, sharpening itself against his other reading the way a knife sharpens against stone, until it had become necessary to find an answer. The question was, why 15? He understood that 15 bloodlines converging in a single person was extraordinary. Ragnar had made that clear with the careful precision of a man choosing not to use words like unprecedented because they implied emotional reactions that he considered unprofessional. But Harry wanted to understand the mechanism, why his bloodlines had converged this way, whether it was accident or design, and whether anyone had written about the theory of bloodline convergence in old magical texts. The answer, it turned out, was in a slim volume bound in dark green leather on the 4th shelf from the bottom of the 3rd case, wedged between a much larger text on Peveril family history and what appeared to be someone's personal journal in handwriting so old it had calcified into pure ornament. The slim book was titled, simply, Convergence. The author's name on the spine had faded to near illegibility, but inside the front cover, written in a clear hand, was a single line, for those who come after. The design is not accidental. Harry sat down cross-legged on the vault floor with the book in his lap and read. The theory, as articulated by an author who wrote with the compact authority of someone who had done the maths and simply reported the results, was this: magical bloodlines were not static. They were living things that responded to magical history, to significant events, to deaths, to choices made at points of genuine consequence. When a bloodline died out or split, its magical inheritance didn't simply vanish, it was redistributed, routing itself toward the nearest viable vessel through traceable genealogical channels. Normally this redistribution was gradual, spreading across many descendants, diluting each individual's inheritance to something ambient and largely inactive. Occasionally, very occasionally, the author wrote, with the calm tone of someone describing a once-in-a-millennium event, the conditions aligned for the redistributed inheritances to concentrate rather than disperse. This required a chain of genealogical coincidences so specific that it was, in any individual generation, essentially impossible. Unless it was being guided. Harry stopped reading. He went back 3 pages and read that section again. There is evidence, the author wrote, in the oldest texts on magical bloodline theory, of a principle called the convergence mandate, a self-reinforcing magical law, older than recorded wizarding history, by which lines of significant magical power will seek to converge in moments of significant magical need. The mandate does not operate consciously. It operates the way gravity operates, as a structural feature of magical reality, indifferent to individual preference, oriented toward a single outcome, the production of a vessel adequate to the moment. The question any reader of this text should be asking, the author continued, and Harry had the distinct impression of someone looking directly at him through 600 years of parchment, is not whether they are such a vessel. The answer to that question is already known. The question is, adequate to what moment, and chosen by what need? Harry closed the book and sat with it for a while. He was not a person who scared easily, or at least not anymore, or at least not about abstract magical destiny. He had spent 11 years being told he mattered for one specific reason, the scar, the survival, the night Voldemort failed, and had spent those same 11 years feeling entirely inadequate to whatever that reason was supposed to mean. Now he was being told he mattered for 15 reasons, possibly for reasons older than the ones everyone already knew about, and his reaction to this was not fear. It was more like the specific feeling of understanding a problem you previously only partially understood. Clarifying rather than frightening. He filed the theory away in the section of his mind he was building for things that mattered but didn't require immediate action, and went back to cataloging. He was on the second-to-last case when he found the warded section. It was subtle, a darkening of the air around 3 shelves in the back corner, a faint resistance when he reached toward them, not a barrier exactly but more like a pause. He stood in front of it and thought about it. Then he pressed his palm flat against the air and let the 15 currents run into the contact point the way Ragnarok had shown him, not pushing, not forcing, just presenting. The pause dissolved. The shelves held 12 books, all dark-bound, all older than anything else in the vault. They had no titles on their spines. He pulled the first one down and opened it to the first page. Notes on the convergent practice of wordless and wandless casting, being the personal records of Ignotus Peveril, written in his 63rd year. Harry sat down very slowly. He read for 2.5 hours. When he came back up from the vault levels and into the natural light of Gringotts' upper halls, Hermione was already in the waiting area. This was not surprising. She had been coming to Gringotts with him most days for the past week, partly because the legal research required the authenticated documents that were held here, and partly because she had asked, with the directness that was becoming one of Harry's favorite things about her, whether she could see the vault library. He had said yes. She had gone in, looked at the assembled thousands of volumes, and made a sound that Harry could only describe as involuntary and religious. She had brought her own notebook. It was larger than his. She was currently writing in it at speed, cross-referencing something in the Goblin Commerce text with something in the Inheritance Law book, and she had a scone from Merryweather's half-eaten beside her with the inattention of someone who had forgotten food existed. "I found something," Harry said, sitting down opposite her. She looked up. She always gave his openings her full attention rather than completing her own sentence first, which he'd noticed and appreciated. He told her about convergence. He told her about the mandate theory and what it implied, and watched her process it with the rapid interior movement that was her thinking. He told her about Ignotus Peveril's personal notes and what was in them. "Wandless casting," she said. "Personal records. How complete are the notes?" "Complete enough that I spent 2 hours reading them and I'm going to spend several more before I have a full picture." He paused. He documented specific exercises. Progressive techniques, starting from almost nothing, from just learning to feel your own magic moving, and building systematically up to full-scale spellwork without a wand or verbal component. Hermione leaned forward. "That's, Harry, texts like that are supposed to not exist anymore. The library at Hogwarts has references to pre-wand magical education, but the actual methodology is considered lost." "It's not lost," Harry said. "It's in a sealed section of my family vault." She absorbed this. "Can I see it?" "When we get to Hogwarts and I've had more time with it, yes." "Not yet, I want to understand it properly before I share it, even with you." He said the "even with you" without self-consciousness, meaning it plainly as the straightforward compliment it was, and she accepted it the same way. "Reasonable," she said. Then, did Ignotus Peveril leave notes on the other 2 brothers? The Hallows connection? Some. Not as detailed. He was clearly uncomfortable writing about the Elder Wand because his brother Antioch was dead by then, and it reads like grief in the margin notes. She was quiet for a moment. "You have all 3 Hallows." "I have 2. The Elder Wand is still in the vault." "I'm not ready for that argument yet." "The argument?" "The Deathly Hallows are supposed to be impossible. Actually holding 2 of them and being descended from all 3 brothers, there are going to be people who have opinions about that." "Dumbledore certainly will," she said dryly. "He's been obsessed with the Elder Wand for decades, according to several sources." She picked up her notebook. "Speaking of whom? I found something this morning that you need to see." She slid the notebook across the table. She had copied out a section of text in her precise, dense handwriting, citing the source as Wisingdomot Conduct Charter, 1902 revision, Appendix C, Section 11. Harry read it. The section dealt with what it called extraordinary censure, a mechanism distinct from the standard motion of censure already filed, applicable in cases where the evidence of misconduct was not merely a matter of professional judgment but constituted a documented magical crime with a formal criminal charge attached. In cases of extraordinary censure, the timelines were different. The standard motion required a scheduled hearing with standard notice periods. Extraordinary censure required a hearing within 21 days of filing. Mandatory. Not discretionary. 21 days. The DMLE inquiry, Harry said slowly. If the DMLE upgrades the inquiry to a formal charge, Hermione said, which Amelia Bones has the authority to do unilaterally as head of the DMLE, the 21-day clock starts immediately. She doesn't need Dumbledore's cooperation. She doesn't need the minister's sign-off on the charge itself, only on prosecution and the censure hearing are different things. She tapped the page. The censure hearing happens regardless of whether prosecution proceeds. It's a Wisengamot internal matter. The DMLE charge just triggers it. Harry looked at her. Have you talked to Amelia Bones about this? I sent her an annotated copy of this section this morning, Hermione said. With a cover note explaining the implication. She sent back 2 words, Hermione said, with the ghost of a smile. Noted. Timing. Which means she's thinking about when to do it, Harry said. Which means she's already decided to do it and is choosing the moment. She closed her notebook. Harry, if Bones files the formal charge and the extraordinary censure motion goes through, we're looking at Dumbledore facing a full Wisengamot hearing in 3 weeks. Not 3 months. 3 weeks. The air in the waiting area felt differently weighted after she said that. We need to be ready for that hearing, Harry said. We do, she agreed. Which is why I've also been reading about the Order of Merlin revocation process, because I think we can get that stripped before the hearing, and walking into the Wisengamot with the Order of Merlin already gone makes the political optics considerably worse for his allies. She paused. The Order of Merlin Oversight Committee met yesterday. They've scheduled a review for next Tuesday. Harry sat back. He was quiet for a moment, feeling the whole structure of it, the interlocking pieces, the timing, the cascading consequences. He'd spent 2 weeks building this architecture with Hermione's help and Ragnar's guidance and Amelia Bones' quietly committed resources, and standing back and looking at the full picture was something between exhilarating and serious. You're remarkable, he told Hermione. She went slightly pink but received it practically. I'm thorough, she said. It's the same thing. It really isn't, he said, but we can argue about that later. The reader's room at Gringotts, a quiet space on the second level that Ragnar had made available to Harry for research purposes, with a standing instruction to staff that anything Harry requested was to be provided without delay, had been their base of operations for the past week. It had good light from high windows, long tables, and a self-refilling carafe of tea that was probably the single greatest feature of the entire enterprise. They were back there by mid-morning, and by 11 o'clock the table was covered in annotated parchment and Harry was working through the Peveril notes while Hermione constructed what she called a legal timeline and Harry called a map of how to win this, which were functionally the same document. Neville Longbottom arrived at 11:15. He had been directed up by Gripknot, who delivered him to the door of the reader's room with the expression of someone who had been given a straightforward task and executed it flawlessly, then departed without ceremony. Neville stood in the doorway looking like a person who had been told to come somewhere important and was now second-guessing the decision. He was round-faced and slightly stocky, with the kind of careful posture that people develop when they've spent a lot of time being told they take up too much space. He was wearing robes that were slightly too large, and carrying a copy of the Gringotts summons letter with the grip of someone not planning to let go of it. Harry Potter, he said, looking between Harry and Hermione with the uncertainty of someone who'd arrived at the right address but wasn't sure they were meant to be inside. Yes, Harry said, and stood up. Neville Longbottom. Neville blinked. You know who I am. I know your family has a connection to mine that apparently neither of us knew about, and that Gringotts sent you a letter this morning about an inheritance assessment. Harry gestured to a chair. Sit down. Do you want tea?
Yes, Neville said, sitting down with the manner of someone deferring to momentum because they don't have a better plan. My gran got the letter first and she was, he paused, choosing a word, very intense about it.
What did she say?
Harry asked. She said I had to come immediately and she was coming with me, except Gringotts specifically said in the letter that the initial assessment was to be conducted with the account holder alone. He looked at the parchment in his hand. She's downstairs in the main hall. She's talking to someone named Ragnarok and I don't. She looked like she knew him.
Harry glanced at Hermione.
She raised an eyebrow that said interesting.
Neville, Harry said, what do you know about your own magical inheritance?
Neville's expression did something complicated.
I know I'm a Longbottom.
Gran says our family has held the same Wisengamot seat for 300 years.
My parents were, he stopped.
My parents are in St. Mungo's.
They've been there since I was about 1.
Long-term ward.
The room got quiet.
Harry knew about the Longbottoms, Voldemort's supporters, the Cruciatus Curse, the Aurors who didn't break but never came back either. It was one of those stories that existed in the wizarding world as a kind of collective grief, spoken about in the past tense even though Frank and Alice Longbottom were still technically present.
I'm sorry, Harry said simply.
Neville nodded with the practice of someone who had been accepting condolences for this since childhood.
They said in the letter that there might be blocks on my inheritance.
Like yours.
His eyes moved to Harry with something cautious in them.
Is that true?
Can they actually do that?
Block what you're supposed to be?
Yes, Harry said.
They did it to me.
11 of 15 bloodlines, completely sealed.
Neville stared.
15.
I know, Harry said.
He didn't try to make it smaller.
Your situation may be different. Your assessment might come back entirely clean, or it might come back with something. Either way you'll know, and knowing is better than not knowing.
Gran always said I wasn't.
Neville stopped.
Started again.
She always said I had trouble with magic because I was a late developer. That I took after my father more than my mother. She wasn't unkind about it, she always looked a bit.
He trailed off.
Worried?
Harry suggested.
Disappointed, Neville said quietly. I could never work out what I was doing wrong.
Harry looked at him steadily.
You might not have been doing anything wrong. The possibility of that landed visibly. Neville sat with it, turning it over, and Harry could see the careful way he held it, not letting himself believe it yet, not wanting to set himself up, but not being able to quite put it down either.
Director Ragnarok will do your assessment personally, Harry said.
He's thorough. Whatever the results are, you'll get a straight answer.
Is he? Neville hesitated.
Is he difficult?
He's direct, Harry said.
He'll tell you exactly what he finds and exactly what it means.
That's not difficult.
That's just honest.
Oh, Neville said, as though this was a novel concept in the context of official meetings.
Hermione, who had been working quietly while this conversation happened, slid a piece of parchment across the table.
This is a brief summary of the assessment process and what to expect during and after.
I wrote it up when I was doing research. She offered it to Neville with the matter-of-fact practicality of someone distributing useful information rather than performing kindness.
It'll help.
Neville took it, looked at Hermione.
You're very organized, he said.
Yes, she agreed.
He almost smiled.
Neville, he said, as if reintroducing himself now that the formal uncertainty had settled.
Hermione, she said.
Welcome to whatever this is.
Legal research and vault archaeology, Harry offered.
Oh, Neville said. Is there anything I can help with?
Yes, actually, Harry said, and Neville looked slightly startled by the immediacy of it.
Your family has held a Wisengamot seat for 300 years. Does your grandmother have any relationship with the other old family representatives? The ones with hereditary seats? She knows all of them, Neville said cautiously. She knows everyone. Do they trust her? Gran. He considered this with genuine seriousness. Yes, actually. She's been around longer than most of them. She has opinions. People listen to them. He paused. She's not very fond of Dumbledore. She blames him for what happened to my parents. Harry felt the shape of something useful click into place with the precision of a well-made lock. Then I'd like to talk to her, Harry said. After your assessment, if she's willing. Neville nodded slowly. I think she will be, he said. She came today looking like someone who's been waiting to be angry about something specific for a very long time. Augusta Longbottom was exactly what Harry had expected, which was to say formidable in the way that old mountains are formidable, without effort, simply by existing and having been there longer than everything around them. She was tall and angular with the posture of someone who had never once slouched, and the hat she wore had a stuffed vulture on it that Harry had been warned about by nothing but instinct. She looked at Harry when he entered the small conference room Ragnarok had made available with the same kind of recalibrating assessment he'd been getting from adults all week, the look that said you are not what I prepared myself for. Harry Potter, she said. Mrs. Longbottom, Harry said, and shook her hand before she could offer it, which seemed to work in his favor because she made a small approving sound. Sit, she said, which was apparently how the Longbottom family opened conversations, and Harry sat. Neville had gone with Gripknot to the assessment chamber. Hermione had stayed in the reader's room with the legal timeline, both because there was work to do and because she had a gift for reading rooms and had correctly identified that Augusta Longbottom was not going to open up with an audience. You filed against Dumbledore, Augusta said. It was not a question. It was more of a statement of something she was in the process of fully endorsing. Gringotts filed, Harry said. On my behalf, with my consent. On the basis of the heritage blocks. Yes. She was quiet for a moment, her hands folded on the table. Albus Dumbledore, she said, and her voice carried the weight of something that had been kept controlled for a long time, convinced the Ministry in 1981 that Frank and Alice's attackers should face the Wisengamot, not Azkaban directly, which is normally correct. He also sat in on the preliminary hearings and advised the presiding judges on sentencing. She paused. He advocated for a sentence that kept the attackers in Azkaban rather than receiving the Dementor's kiss, on the grounds that they might have information about other Death Eater activities that could be extracted later. Harry waited. 20 years later, she said, that information has never been extracted. The attackers are still alive. Frank and Alice are still in St. Mungo's. She looked at Harry directly. I have always believed that Albus Dumbledore keeps people alive and in place because broken pieces are more useful to him than resolved situations. A resolved situation has no leverage. A wound that never heals has all of it. Harry held her gaze. I believe that too, he said quietly. Something in Augusta Longbottom's posture, already excellent, became something else. More angular and more certain and less like an elderly woman at a table and more like a figure that had been standing at the exact same post for 20 years waiting for a relief that had finally arrived. What do you need from me? She asked. 15 signatures on the motion of censure, Harry said. I currently have 3. Amelia Bones is likely to add more through the DMLE, but for the broader coalition, the old family seats, someone those families trust needs to make the case. Someone with enough standing and enough history that they can't be dismissed as acting on personal grievance. She looked at him with those sharp eyes. You want me to be the face of the coalition. I want you to be yourself, Harry said. Which, from what I understand, is more than sufficient. This time there was no mistaking the expression. It was satisfaction of the deeply vindicated variety. There are 8 families with hereditary Wisengamot seats whose heads I can speak to in the next 72 hours, she said. Not all of them will sign.
Some are too tied to Dumbledore's influence. But enough will. She stood, which signified that the meeting was concluded. I will require regular updates on the legal strategy. My associate Hermione Granger is managing the legal timeline, Harry said, standing. She'll send you daily summaries. She's thorough. Granger, Augusta repeated. Muggleborn? Yes, Harry said evenly. She held his gaze for a moment. Then, if she's half as thorough as this meeting suggests, that's all I need to know. She left with the stride of a woman who had 7 families to contact before dinner. Neville's assessment took 4 hours. He came out of the ceremonial chamber walking slightly differently than he'd gone in, not physically, but in the way that people who have been living inside a smaller version of themselves walk differently when they discover the actual dimensions. He sat down in the reader's room where Harry and Hermione were still working, accepted a cup of tea from Hermione, and was quiet for a long moment. 7, he said. Harry looked up. 7 blocked bloodlines, Neville said. Longbottom, obviously. And then 6 others, including, he paused, and Harry could see him still integrating the reality of it, including a Gryffindor line, like you. A different branch, Ragnarok said, but converging. He looked at his hands. They said my trouble with magic was never about how I was doing it. The blocks were creating an interference pattern. Every time I tried to cast, I was working against 11 different walls. His voice was very controlled. I've been working against 11 different walls my whole life. The room was quiet. Not anymore, Harry said. Neville looked up. They removed them. Ragnarok did, same ritual, different configuration. It took longer. He flexed his hands experimentally. I feel, he stopped. I don't have words for it. Like you woke up, Harry offered. Neville stared at him. Yes. Exactly like that. I know, Harry said. They looked at each other across the table, 2 11-year-old boys who had spent their entire lives smaller than they were supposed to be, sitting in a bank at the bottom of the world with the real size of themselves finally filling the space, and no further words seemed particularly necessary. Hermione, practically, said, Ragnarok filed a secondary heritage theft complaint on your behalf, yes? I saw the documentation. Yes, Neville said. Gran is, she was not calm when they told her. He paused. She kept saying I knew in very quiet voice. She kept saying it. The interference pattern, Harry said. Your grandmother probably suspected something was wrong but didn't know what to name it. She's going to be contacted about the coalition, Neville said. It wasn't quite a question. She's already making calls, Harry said. Neville nodded slowly. Right. He looked at the parchment-covered table, at the legal timeline, at the stacks of reference texts. He looked at Harry and Hermione working in the easy parallel efficiency of people who have developed a functional research rhythm. He picked up the document nearest to him, read 2 lines, and then looked up. What do I do? Can you charm plants? Harry asked. Yes, Neville said, with a certainty that was entirely new in his voice, like a string that had just been properly tuned. Better than anything else. Always could, even with the blocks. Gran kept a greenhouse. Ragnarok told me there are ward plants in the Peveril Vault, Harry said. Old magical cultivars that were used in estate warding, pre-wand era. I need someone who knows what they're looking at when we try to identify them. The books in the vault describe them but I'm not a herbologist. Neville considered this with the expression of someone who has been told they are useful for precisely the thing they are actually good at, which turns out to feel quite different from being useful for the things people think they should be good at. I can do that, he said. Good, Harry said. We'll go to the vault tomorrow. Together? Neville said. Together, Harry confirmed. Bring notebook. Late in the afternoon, Harry went back to the vault alone. He hadn't told Hermione or Neville about the next part, not because he didn't trust them, but because there were some things that needed to be done privately first, understood privately first, before they could be shared or explained or integrated into the larger structure of what they were building. He sat in the vault with the Peveril notes and began to work through the first exercise Ignotus had documented. It was not impressive as exercises went. It didn't involve casting anything. It didn't involve producing any visible effect. It involved sitting still with your hands in your lap and learning to feel the movement of your own magic, not as a diffuse ambient presence, which was how wizards generally related to their power, but as something with current and direction and texture. Ignotus had written, with the patient precision of a man describing something obvious only in retrospect, that the reason wand-assisted magic was less efficient than it appeared was that the wand imposed a single channel on something that naturally moved in multiple directions simultaneously. Learning to feel the multiplicity before trying to direct it was the prerequisite for everything else. Harry sat in the vault with the cold stone under him and the old library around him and tried to feel the multiplicity. It took 40 minutes before he felt anything specific. Then it was subtle, like becoming aware of breathing, of the heartbeat, of systems that had always been running but had never required conscious attention. He felt the Potter current first, because it was the only one that had never been blocked and therefore the one most familiar. Then, with the careful deliberateness of turning up a lamp, he became aware of the others. Each had a texture. The Gryffindor current was warm and somewhat aggressive, wanting toward action. The Peveril was older and quieter and ran deeper. The Slytherin was sharp and precise, like a well-honed edge. The Merlin current was something else entirely, not louder than the others but wider, threading through everything else like a key in a structure that only made sense with it in place. He sat with all 15 of them for a while, just learning the map. Then he tried something small. Ignotus had written that the first practical exercise was to produce a light, not lumos, not any existing spell with a wand-carved channel, but to take the Peveril current specifically and let it express itself as light without any formula attached to it. Just intent and channel and the willingness to let it happen without trying to control the exact shape of it. Harry extended his right hand, palm up. Thought about light. Let the Peveril current move toward his palm. A small, steady, blue-white light appeared in the center of his hand. Not flickering. Not unstable. Just there, the way a lamp is there when you turn it on, waiting to be useful. He looked at it. He thought, I have been doing this wrong my entire life. Then he thought, no. I've been prevented from doing this right. Then he thought about nothing in particular and just looked at the light in his hand in the old vault that had been waiting 50 years for him to find it, and let himself feel the difference between the two of those things. After a while, he closed his hand and the light went out. He opened his notebook and wrote 3 pages of observations, precise and careful, the way Ignotus had written. He was going to be very good at this. The Order of Merlin Oversight Committee met on Tuesday, as Hermione had said it would, in a wood-paneled room on the 3rd floor of the Ministry with 7 committee members and a stack of certified documents from Gringotts and one notably absent recipient of a first-class award who had sent, through his solicitor, a 12-page response that Harry had read and found impressive in its architecture if not in its ethics. Dumbledore's response argued, in essence, that the blocks had been a necessary protective measure, that the threat of Voldemort's return had justified extraordinary means, that the blocks had been intended to shield rather than suppress, and that their removal by an 11-year-old without appropriate adult guidance constituted a risk to both the child and the wider magical community. It was, Harry had to admit, a good argument. It was the argument of a man who genuinely believed what he was saying, or who had convinced himself with sufficient thoroughness that the distinction between genuine belief and sophisticated self-justification had become academic. He had sent back, through Ragnarok, a 4-paragraph response that cited 4 specific statutes, attached the authenticated assessment showing the block structure, noted that the blocks were designed to suppress all active magical ability rather than any specific threat-related capability, and concluded with the observation that a protective measure that coincidentally also prevented the protected individual from accessing any knowledge of their own heritage, any independent legal standing, and any magical capacity sufficient to self-advocate was either extraordinarily bad design or not, in fact, a protective measure. He had let Hermione read the response before sending it. She had said, "Harry." He'd said, "Too harsh." She'd said, "Too good." "He's going to know exactly how intelligent you are now." "He already does," Harry said. "And I want him to." The Order of Merlin Oversight Committee deliberated for 40 minutes and voted 5-2 in favor of initiating formal revocation proceedings. It was not yet stripped. Revocation required a secondary vote after a 10-day review period, but the proceedings had begun, and the formal notification to Dumbledore went out the same afternoon. Hermione had ticked it off the legal timeline with a red quill that she kept specifically for completed items. Harry had watched her do it and thought about the next piece. "The ICW response came this morning," he said. She looked up. And they've assigned a formal observer to the British office with specific responsibility for the heritage suppression case," he said. "The observer's name is Beaumont Marceline. She's French, she has a 20-year track record of ICW rights cases, and Ragnarok says she is, and I quote, the most inconvenient person the ICW employs, which means she is exactly what we need." Hermione looked at him for a moment. "How does Ragnarok know Beaumont Marceline?" "I don't know, and I decided not to ask." "Wise," she agreed, and added the development to the timeline. The legal structure was building. The clock was running. And somewhere in the Headmaster's tower at Hogwarts, Harry knew, Albus Dumbledore was doing what he always did, looking 3 moves ahead, reassessing, and building a new architecture from whatever he had left. Harry thought about the light in his palm in the old vault. About 15 currents running clean and unblocked. About the map of how to win this, growing longer and more detailed every day. He thought, let him look 3 moves ahead. He was already 4 moves past that. Chapter 4, What the Prophet Printed. The Daily Prophet ran the story for 6 days straight. Not the same story. Rita Skeeter was not the sort of journalist who repeated herself when there was fresh material available, and the Gringotts filing had handed her approximately 18 months of fresh material in a single morning. She worked through it with the systematic thoroughness of a woman who had been waiting for a story this large to fall into her lap and was absolutely not going to waste it. Day 1 was the headline Harry had already seen, Gringotts files formal complaint, Dumbledore accused of heritage suppression. Day 2 was a deep dive into the legal mechanism, surprisingly accurate, with an anonymous ministry source who Harry was fairly certain was Amelia Bones' second-in-command. Day 3 was a history piece about heritage suppression cases in British wizarding law, the last of which had been in 1743, which established usefully that what Dumbledore had allegedly done was not a technicality but a serious crime with serious historical precedent. Day 4 was the headline that made half the wizarding world choke on their morning tea. Who is Harry Potter, really? The boy who lived has been a fixture of British wizarding consciousness for 10 years, the humble orphan, the symbol of hope, the child raised quietly in the Muggle world by his only living relatives. But new documents from Gringotts Wizarding Bank suggest that the story the wizarding world has been told about Harry Potter is considerably simpler than the truth. Sources close to the investigation indicate that Mr. Potter carries no fewer than 15 distinct magical bloodlines, several of historical and genealogical significance so extraordinary that our researchers required 2 days to verify the claims. Among those bloodlines, this reporter can confirm, Potter, Peverell, Gryffindor, yes, readers, that Gryffindor, and at least 2 further lines of Founder-era descent. The full list has not been disclosed, but our sources indicate it includes bloodlines that have not been active in Britain for centuries. For 10 years, someone ensured that neither Harry Potter nor the wizarding public knew any of this. The question worth asking is not merely what was suppressed. The question is why. Harry read the Day 4 edition over breakfast at Privet Drive and thought that Rita Skeeter was, whatever her methods, genuinely talented at identifying the exact question that would lodge in a reader's mind and not let go. Day 5 was about Sirius Black. Harry hadn't spoken to Skeeter directly and hadn't told anyone to speak to her about Sirius, but Ragnarok's filing notation had apparently been enough,
the DMLE's records were technically public under a Freedom of Information provision that Amelia Bones had, in what Harry suspected was a deliberate act of strategic document accessibility, failed to restrict. Skeeter had found the record of the 1983 review that hadn't happened, the memo recommending it, the decline notation, and the name of the person who'd advised the minister's office to decline. 10 years without trial, the forgotten prisoner of Azkaban. Harry folded the paper carefully. He read the serious article 3 times. It was strange, reading about someone you'd never met as though they were a story from history, strange and wrong in a specific way that had a flavor he was still learning to identify. Sirius Black was 33 years old. He had been 22 when he went to Azkaban. The article had a photograph, taken at a ministry function in 1980, before everything. He was laughing in it, young and bright-eyed, one arm thrown around a tall man with messy black hair who was laughing too, and Harry looked at that photograph for a very long time. Day 6 was the reaction piece, and the reactions, plural, were a story in themselves. The wizarding world, Harry was discovering, did not respond to large revelations as a single unified entity. It responded as approximately 14 different entities simultaneously, each processing the same information through entirely different filters, and the resulting noise was something between a hurricane and a very loud family dinner. The older families, broadly speaking, fell into 3 camps. The first was Augusta Longbottom's coalition, old houses who had never fully trusted Dumbledore and had been waiting for a legitimate reason to say so, now lining up behind the censure motion with the satisfaction of people whose instincts had been publicly validated. The Bones family was prominent here. The Abbotts. 3 or 4 others whose names Harry was still learning. The second camp was the Dumbledore loyalists, families who had built their post-war social position around proximity to the man who had defeated Grindelwald and midwifed the defeat of Voldemort, and who were now invested in defending him with a vigor proportional to how much that proximity had cost them to cultivate. They wrote letters to the prophet. They gave interviews. They used words like context and wartime necessity and the greater good with the frequency of people who had been issued a set of talking points. The third camp, smaller but not negligible, was the one Harry found most interesting, the genuinely uncertain, the people who had admired Dumbledore sincerely and were now sitting with the discomfort of evidence that complicated a straightforward admiration. They were quiet in public and, Harry suspected, considerably louder in private. The Hogwarts staff, as far as Harry could determine through second-hand sources, had not issued any public statement. He thought about what that silence meant for each of them specifically, and made notes. The most consequential reaction, however, was not in the prophet at all. It arrived by private owl on the morning of day 6, sealed in plain grey wax with no identifying mark, addressed in a small neat hand. Mr. Potter, you don't know me, though I knew your parents well. My name is Minerva McGonagall. I am Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts and your future head of house. I am writing to you privately because I am not yet in a position to act publicly, but I want you to know that what has been done to you was done without my knowledge. I will not insult you by suggesting this exonerates the institution I represent. It does not. But I believe you should know that not everyone at Hogwarts is Albus Dumbledore's instrument, and when you arrive in September, you will not be without allies within these walls. I look forward to meeting you properly. Minerva McGonagall. Harry read it twice and then wrote back immediately, in his precise hand. Professor McGonagall, thank you. I believe you. I'm looking forward to September as well, and I suspect it's going to be rather more interesting than either of us anticipated. Harry Potter P.S. I'm also writing to ask about a practical matter. The Hogwarts Library. I understand from my research that there is a restricted section accessible only with staff authorization. I'd like permission to use it from the first week of term. I'll explain why when I see you, but the short version is, there are things I need to cross-reference that require original source texts. He sent it with Hedwig and went back to his reading. The meeting with Arcturus Black happened on a Thursday, in a townhouse in Grimmauld Place that looked from the outside like a building that had decided the 20th century was optional and had been successfully ignoring it for the past 80 years. Harry had arranged it through Ragnarok, who had communicated through the Black family solicitor,
who had communicated through a chain of formal magical correspondence that seemed excessive for arranging to meet one elderly wizard but which Ragnarok had explained was simply how the old families did things, and there was a certain value in doing things correctly where the old families were concerned. Arcturus Black answered the door himself, which Harry had not expected. He was in his 80s, ancient and sharp and built like a man who had always expected to outlast everyone around him and had been correct. His silver hair was immaculate. His robes were the kind of quality that had stopped being fashionable 70 years ago and had gone all the way around to being timeless again. He looked at Harry on his doorstep with eyes that were a very specific shade of grey that Harry would later recognize in a photograph of Sirius. "Harry Potter," he said. "Mr. Black," Harry said. Arcturus studied him for a long moment with those grey eyes that had seen a great deal. Then he stepped back from the door. "Come in." The interior of the house was dark wood and old portraits and the smell of a library used seriously for many decades. Harry followed Arcturus into a sitting room where a fire was burning despite the summer warmth, because Arcturus Black was 83 and made his own ambient temperature decisions, and sat in the chair he was gestured toward. "You carry the Black inheritance," Arcturus said, sitting opposite him. Not a greeting exactly. More of an opening statement in a conversation they were both going to take seriously. "Yes," Harry said. "Through my godfather's bond." Ragnarok confirmed it. "Sirius," Arcturus said. The name came out differently than Harry had expected, not with the cold distance of a patriarch who had formally disowned a wayward heir, but with something more complicated underneath it. "He was imprisoned without trial," Harry said. "I know. I intend to have him released." Something moved in Arcturus's expression. Not surprise, he was not, Harry thought, a man who was surprised by direct statements. More like the expression of someone revising an assessment and finding the revised version significantly more interesting than the original. "You intend," Arcturus said. "I have Amelia Bones' documentation from the DMLE. I have the legal pathway, the retroactive illegality of the imprisonment after the emergency powers lapsed. I need a magical advocate with standing to file the motion for review." Harry held his gaze. "Ragnarok told me you might be willing." "Ragnarok," Arcturus said, "has been telling people things about my willingness for 60 years and has been correct approximately 80% of the time." He was quiet for a moment. "Why do you want Sirius released?" Harry considered the question. It was a good question, not the obvious question, but the one underneath it, the one that actually mattered. "Because he's my godfather," Harry said. "And because he didn't do it. And because the kind of world I'm trying to build has to have a different relationship to justice than the one that put him in Azkaban." He paused. "And because he's been in there for 10 years for something he didn't do, and I can get him out, and there isn't any version of that situation where I don't try." Arcturus looked at him for a long time. "Sirius was always the one I expected least from," he said at last. "He rejected everything the Black family stood for. Ran away at 16. Got himself sorted into Gryffindor specifically to irritate his father, I always suspected." The corner of his mouth moved. "He was also the most genuinely talented of his generation. Threw it all away to go play war hero." He folded his hands. "When they told me he was in Azkaban, I didn't believe it immediately. Sirius was many things. A betrayer of friends was not among them." "Did you try to help him?" Harry asked. "I tried to request a review," Arcturus said evenly. "I was told the matter was handled. I was told it by someone I was, at the time, inclined to believe." The fire crackled. "I am not inclined to believe him anymore," Arcturus said. "I know," Harry said. "That's why I'm here." Arcturus Black stood with the deliberate ease of someone who had made a decision and was acting on it. "I will file the motion for review as your magical advocate. I will also file a formal motion to the Wisengamot challenging the grounds of the original imprisonment, citing the post-1983 review failure. These are two separate but complementary filings." He paused. "This will not be fast.
Even with the documentation, the ministry will resist, they don't like admitting to decade-long errors. I know, Harry said again. But once the Wisengamot censure hearing happens and Dumbledore's position is formally compromised, the political cover for resisting evaporates. Arcturus studied him with a look that had moved several degrees past professional assessment into something that Harry recognized, from the inside, as the specific quality of attention you paid to a person who was thinking the same way you were but from a different direction. How old are you? Arcturus asked. 11, Harry said. The corner of Arcturus Black's mouth moved again, and this time it completed the motion. Your father, he said, was exactly this annoying at 11. Your mother was considerably more annoying, and she was 12 at the time. It hit Harry in a place he hadn't entirely prepared for, the casual mention of his parents as living people rather than symbols, described with a very old man's honest irritation and what was clearly underneath it a very old man's genuine fondness. He kept his face steady because he was getting better at that, but he filed the moment carefully. I'll need to meet with you weekly, Harry said. For updates on the filings. My solicitor will arrange it, Arcturus said. I will also sign Augusta Longbottom's censure coalition. She contacted me yesterday. You've been thorough. I try, Harry said, and stood. On the way back through London, Harry stopped at a phone box in Charing Cross Road and called a number Amelia Bones had left with a note reading for situations that require speed rather than formality. The phone rang 4 times. Bones. It's Harry. Arcturus Black has agreed. He'll file the motion for review as my magical advocate, plus the separate grounds challenge. A pause that contained the sound of someone making a note. Good. The DMLE formal charge is going through tomorrow morning. The extraordinary censure clock starts at 9 a.m. 21 days from then. Who's the presiding officer? Harry asked. Ogden. He's fair. He doesn't like Dumbledore particularly, but more importantly he likes correct procedure even less, he'll run a clean hearing regardless of what he personally thinks. And Dumbledore's response? He'll argue in person, presumably. He'll argue in person, he'll bring character witnesses, he'll make the greater good argument, and he'll be very convincing, Bones said, with the flat candor of someone acknowledging a real tactical challenge. He's had 90 years to perfect that particular speech. Don't underestimate it. I'm not underestimating it, Harry said. I'm planning around it. He paused. Has Beaumont Marceline arrived? Yesterday. She is, as advertised, extremely inconvenient. She's already requested 3 sets of ministry records that nobody has looked at since the 70s. A pause. She also sent Dumbledore a formal ICW notification that his mugwump position is under review, which she delivered in person at Hogwarts. How did that go? I wasn't there, but my contact at Hogwarts said Dumbledore listened to the entire notification without a word, thanked her very politely, offered her tea, and showed her to the door. Bones paused. She said it was the most unsettling interaction of her career, which, given that her career has included 3 international dark wizard prosecutions, is saying something. He's not afraid, Harry said. No, Bones agreed. He's not. Keep that in mind. I always do, Harry said, and hung up. The counter-move, when it came, was more elegant than Harry had expected. Not an attack. Not a denial. Not even a public statement from Dumbledore himself, which would have been too undignified and too easily rebutted. It came through Hogwarts, quietly, in the form of a letter sent to every incoming first-year family the week before the Hogwarts letters went out. Standard parchment, school seal, Minerva McGonagall's signature, except Harry had a note from McGonagall saying she hadn't written it, which meant someone had used the school seal without her authorization, and the handwriting, while it didn't match Dumbledore's known hand, had several structural features that Hermione had identified by spending 40 minutes with a graphological text as consistent with someone trying not to match their own handwriting. The letter was warm, reassuring, and concerned.
It noted that recent media coverage had created anxiety in our community about the safety and well-being of incoming students. It assured families that Hogwarts remained a place of safety and learning under the continued headship of Albus Dumbledore, who remained fully committed to his role. It mentioned, in the third paragraph, almost in passing, that certain legal proceedings currently in the press were of a contested and complex nature and that families should wait for the full facts to emerge before drawing conclusions. It was, Harry thought, very well done. It didn't say anything provably false. It just created a frame, complex, contested, wait and see, that was designed to make cautious, worried parents hesitate before lining up against the headmaster of the school their children were about to attend. "He's targeting the parents," Hermione said, reading it over Harry's shoulder. They were in Merryweather's, their default operational base at this point, and it was raining outside with the thorough commitment of English summer rain. Parents who aren't deep in wizarding politics. People who just want their kid to go to school safely. He's also, Harry said, tapping the third paragraph, preemptively framing the censure hearing as something complex and contested rather than straightforward and evidenced. If he can get that framing to stick before the hearing looks like a witch hunt rather than a legitimate process, Hermione finished. She looked at him. "What do we do?" "We don't respond to the letter directly," Harry said. "Responding to it gives it more weight than it deserves. We make sure the hearing preparation is completely airtight, so that when the hearing happens, complex and contested becomes impossible to sustain." He drummed his fingers on the table. "But there's something else." He pulled out a piece of parchment and wrote a short note, folded it, and addressed it. "Who's that to?" Hermione asked. "Rita Skeeter," Harry said. She looked at him with the expression of someone who was about to raise a concern. "I know," he said, before she could. "She's not reliable. She sensationalizes. She's used questionable methods. But she's also read every piece of documentation Gringotts put out and she hasn't made a single factual error in 6 days of coverage, which means she's being careful because she knows this story is real and she doesn't want to give Dumbledore's people a technical inaccuracy to hang a rebuttal on." He paused. "She's useful right now." Carefully. Hermione considered this with the expression of someone updating their ethical calculations in real time. "What are you telling her?" "I'm not telling her anything. I'm asking her to look at something specific." He tapped the Hogwarts letter. This letter was sent using the Hogwarts school seal without the deputy headmistress's knowledge or authorization. That's a misuse of an official institutional emblem, which is a ministry violation under the Official Magical Institutions Act, 1952. It also raises questions about how many other communications sent under official institutional authority over the past decade may have originated from the same source. Hermione was very still. "How many letters," she said slowly, "has Dumbledore sent over the years using Hogwarts official authority? To families. To the ministry. To the Wisengamot. To parents of students. To anyone who might be influenced by the headmaster of Hogwarts rather than just Albus Dumbledore personally." "That's exactly the question Skeeter is going to ask," Harry said. "And finding the answer is going to occupy her very thoroughly for the next 2 weeks and keep her running stories that make that particular countermove look like what it actually is." Hermione let out a slow breath. "You're good at this," she said. "I've had a lot of time to think," Harry said. "Quiet childhoods do that." She looked at him, and there was the particular quality of attention she gave things that hurt, not pitying, not uncomfortable, just honestly present for it. "Not quiet," she said quietly. "Lonely." He held her gaze for a moment. "Yes," he said. "That." She nodded and picked up her quill, and they went back to work. Neville, as it turned out, was remarkable in a greenhouse. Harry had gone to Longbottom Manor twice that week to work through the Peveril Vault plant catalogue with Neville's guidance, and the experience of watching Neville in his element was something Harry stored carefully in the place he kept things that mattered. The careful posture was gone in the greenhouse, entirely absent, replaced by a physical ease and confidence that was completely different from the uncertain, slightly apologetic boy who'd shown up at Gringotts 2 weeks ago. He moved through the cultivated rows with the sure-handedness of someone reading a language everyone else found foreign, identifying species by touch and smell as much as sight, explaining what each plant did with the clear precision of someone who'd been learning this since he was old enough to walk. The Peveril ward plants had official Latin names in the catalogue, but Neville went straight past those to their properties. This one, Custodia Perpetua, it's a permanent boundary marker. Establishes a ward line that can't be moved once it's rooted. The old families used them instead of stone boundaries because stone can be moved. He turned a leaf carefully in his fingers. This is what Gringotts uses for their outer perimeter. I'd know this anywhere. Gran has one cutting she's kept alive for 30 years. And this one? Harry asked, indicating a dark-leafed plant in the second catalogue section. Veritas umbra. Shadow truth plant. It reacts to deliberate deception within its radius, the leaves go silver. You'd put these in a room where you needed to know if someone was lying. He paused. They're illegal now. Ministry banned them in 1954, officially because they were unreliable, but Gran always said the real reason was that too many ministry officials kept walking past them and turning the room silver. Harry noted that down. Can they be grown from seed? Given the right conditions, yes. Neville looked at him. Are you thinking about the hearing room? I'm thinking about a lot of rooms, Harry said. Neville almost grinned, a quick, private expression that was entirely different from the careful almost smiles he'd worn for the first day at Gringotts. I can start some seedlings. They take about 6 weeks to be useful, which is cutting it close, but, do it, Harry said. Whatever you need. Gringotts will cover the materials. You've spent a significant amount of money in the last 2 weeks, Neville observed, in the tone of someone noting something they consider worth mentioning. I have 15 vaults, Harry said. Several of which haven't been opened in decades. I think we'll manage. Neville absorbed this. Right. He went back to the catalogue with the focused pleasure of someone doing exactly what they should be doing. The third section here, these are communication plans. Pre-owl, pre-flu. They were used for magical messaging between estates. This one, Oris Sylvestris, forest ear, it amplifies and transmits sound across distances if you have paired specimens. Very old magic. He looked up. There are 3 pairs listed in the Peveril catalogue. Harry stopped writing and looked at him properly. Transmit sound across distances. Without any other magical infrastructure. Without anything, Neville said. No flu network. No owl. No traceable magical signature. They looked at each other. Is there a way to check if the specimens are still viable? Harry asked. I'd have to see them in person, Neville said. But if the vault has spatial extension enchantments, there might be a preservation ward as well. In the right conditions, these specimens could have been maintained in stasis for 50 years and still be perfectly viable. Tomorrow, Harry said. Gringotts. Bring your kit. Already planning on it, Neville said, and went back to reading with the expression of someone who was, for the first time in memory, exactly where they were supposed to be. The day before the DML formal charge was filed, Dumbledore made his second move. It was more direct than the letter. It was also, Harry thought, more desperate, which told him something about how Dumbledore was reading the situation. He received a visitor at Privet Drive, not Dumbledore himself, but a man named Elphias Doge, elderly and gentle-faced, who introduced himself as an old friend of Dumbledore's and asked very kindly if Harry would like to hear the other side of the story. Harry offered him tea and listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which seemed to unsettle Doge more than any challenge would have. The argument was exactly what he'd expected from the 12-page solicitor's response, delivered in person with the added warmth of an old man's genuine belief in his friend. The blocks had been placed after a divination, or rather a prophecy, details elided carefully, suggested that Harry would face significant danger if his full power was known. The blocks were intended to make him appear less significant, less threatening, less of a target. Dumbledore had intended to remove them himself, at the appropriate time, when Harry was prepared. At what age was he going to decide I was prepared? Harry asked. Doge blinked. Well, 17. 20. Never. Harry kept his voice conversational. Because what I'm hearing is that the plan was to reveal my full heritage to me when he decided the time was right, which means he intended to control that information for the entirety of my childhood and potentially beyond. That's not protection. That's custody. Albus only wants what's best. I don't doubt he thinks that, Harry said. That's the problem. Doge looked at him with the expression of a man who had come in with a prepared script and found the room entirely different from what the script assumed. You're very young to be so, decided. Harry offered. I was going to say certain, Doge said quietly. I have good reason to be certain, Harry said. I've read everything there is to read on this. I've talked to the people who have standing in it. I've sat in a vault that has been waiting 50 years for me to find it, and I have read my great however many times grandfather's private notes on what I should actually be capable of. He paused. I'm not certain because I'm arrogant. I'm certain because I've done the work. Doge was quiet for a long moment. He looked, genuinely, sad. Not manipulatively sad, the real kind, the kind that comes from a person who loves someone and is watching that person's world come apart. Albus isn't evil, Doge said quietly. I know he isn't, Harry said. But I also know that the people who do the most damage in the world are very rarely evil. They're usually convinced they're right. Doge set down his teacup and stood with the movements of a man carrying something heavy. He won't stop, he said. He genuinely believes he's acting in your best interest and in the best interest of the wizarding world. He will not simply accept this. I know, Harry said. What he believes about your destiny, about what you have to do, about Voldemort, it runs very deep. He's built everything around it. I know that too, Harry said. But here's the thing, Mr. Doge, whatever my destiny is, whatever I have to face, I'm going to face it as myself. Not as his version of me. He held the old man's gaze. That's not negotiable. Doge picked up his hat. He looked at Harry for a long moment, with the expression of a man who had arrived expecting to do his friend a service and was leaving with something considerably more complicated in his hands. Your father, he said at the door, would have said almost exactly the same thing. He left. Harry stood in the Dursleys' front hallway for a moment after the door closed, then went back to his room and added a note to his file on Dumbledore's likely hearing strategy. He believes it. All of it. Build counter-arguments that acknowledge the sincerity without conceding the legality. Tribunal will respond better to that than to attacking his motives directly. He underlined it twice and went to practice his wandless exercises in the garden. The exercises were progressing faster than Ignotus Peveril's note suggested they would, which Harry suspected had to do with the Merlin currents amplification effect that Ragnarok had mentioned. He was 3 weeks into the practice and had moved past the basic light exercise into what Ignotus called current direction, the ability to extend a specific bloodline current outward from the body, toward a target, without wand mediation. The Gryffindor current was easiest for this because it was the most action-oriented. The Slytherin current was precise and controlled, better for sustained effects than sudden ones. The Peveril current was the foundation of everything. He was in the back garden, working through the Slytherin exercise, when something shifted. It was not a dramatic shift. It was more like a frequency change, a new note entering a chord that had been building for 3 weeks, something that had been far away and was now closer. He stopped what he was doing and stood very still and felt it the way he felt all 15 currents, the way the Peveril notes had taught him to feel things, not with alarm, not with reaction, just with the clear attention of assessment. It was a presence. At the outer edge of whatever perceptual range he was developing, something old and dark and very powerful was paying attention to him. Not close. Not immediate. But definitely aware. Not Dumbledore. Dumbledore had a presence too, He'd felt it twice, a golden-edged thing that moved like weather, but this was different. This was something that had survived its own death and was therefore not entirely bound by the normal constraints of magical awareness and distance. Harry stood in the garden for a long moment. He thought about what Doge had said. Whatever he believes about your destiny. He thought about a prophecy mentioned but not named. He thought about a dark presence at the edge of his awareness, paying attention to him with what felt like genuine assessment rather than malice, the attention of something deciding whether to be interested. He breathed steadily and thought, not yet. Not this problem yet. He went inside and wrote a note to Ragnarok asking about magical presence detection and the specific qualities of Voldemort's known magical signature, flagged it as non-urgent but important, and filed it in the folder labeled Voldemort, longer game. Then he wrote a second note to Hermione asking if she'd found anything in the Hogwarts library request response. McGonagall had written back the previous week with provisional agreement contingent on a staff meeting, and whether the wandless magic primer had given her any ideas about the hearing strategy. He sealed both letters and went to prepare dinner because it was his turn, and the Dursleys had somehow, over the past 3 weeks, developed the habit of not commenting on this in any way that suggested they were still operating under the previous arrangement. It was, he thought, remarkable what changed when you stopped being afraid. Amelia Bones filed the formal charge at 9:03 the next morning. By 9:15, the Wisingamot Administrative Office had received the extraordinary censure notification. By 9:30, Tiberius Ogden had formally assumed the temporary role of presiding officer. By 10 o'clock, the hearing date had been set. 3 weeks from today. Harry was eating breakfast when Hedwig came in with the confirmation from Ragnarok, and he read it with the calm of someone who has been building toward a moment for long enough that when it arrives it feels less like shock and more like recognition. He finished his toast. "Right," he said to Hedwig, who blinked at him with amber eyes that were getting used to mornings like this. 3 weeks. She clicked her beak. "I know," he said. "Plenty to do." He went upstairs, opened his notebook to the hearing preparation section, and began. Chapter 5, Fire and Old Magic. 3 weeks was not a long time. Harry had a list that ran to 4 pages and crossed items off it with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned, young, that the only reliable way to move through a large problem was to treat it as a series of small ones and solve them in order. The list had categories. Legal preparation. Magical development. Alliance maintenance. Serious. The items under each heading were specific, actionable, and dated, because Hermione had pointed out in their second week of working together that undated tasks had a tendency to feel urgent without ever becoming completed. He was crossing off 2 items every day, sometimes 3. The wandless practice had become 2 sessions daily, morning in the back garden before the Dursleys were awake, evening in his room with the door locked. He worked through Ignotus Peveril's notes systematically, a new exercise every 2 or 3 days, letting each one bed in properly before moving to the next. He didn't rush it. The notes themselves discouraged rushing in the patient voice of someone who had made that mistake and was now writing from the other side of it. By the end of the first week of the 3, he could produce a sustained shield, not a Protego derivative, which was wand architecture adapted for wandless use and therefore structurally inefficient, but something older, built from the Peveril current running as a skin across the surface of his extended awareness. It held against a thrown stone, against a conjured gust of wind, against Hermione experimentally casting Wingardium Leviosa at him from across the reader's room with a raised eyebrow that clearly said, "I'm doing this for research purposes and find it professionally interesting." The stone had bounced off. Hermione had written 4 pages of notes about it. "It's not a reflection," she said, circling something in her notebook. "The stone didn't bounce back toward me at the same angle. It deflected sideways. That's energy dispersion rather than reflection." Ignotus text says that's deliberate, yes. A reflective shield can be turned against the caster by a sufficiently skilled opponent, but a dispersive one just dissipates the force, Harry said. Spreads it. Nothing comes back. Structurally much sounder under sustained attack, she said, with the expression she wore when something confirmed a theoretical prediction. But it would cost more energy to maintain. Less than you'd think, Harry said. The Merlin current runs underneath and does most of the maintenance automatically once you establish the shape. It's more like, he thought about how to describe it. Like the difference between holding a door shut with your hands and leaning a chair against it. The chair does the work. She wrote that down too. The second week, he started working with the Slytherin current specifically. This was different from the Gryffindor and Peveril work, slower, more internal, requiring a quality of focus that was less like effort and more like extreme patience. The Slytherin current didn't want to be directed outward. It wanted to build inward, to run through him and settle into precision, and the practical result of working with it was not dramatic visible effects but a kind of mental sharpening that manifested as the ability to feel the magical architecture of things around him. Spells on objects. Ward structures. The ambient magical residue of places with long histories. He was in the Peveril vault when he felt it most clearly, all the layered enchantments in the stone, each one a different age and style and intent, readable to a trained attention the way tree rings are readable to a forester. Some of them were still active. Some had faded to residue. Two of them, in the ward structure around the sealed shelf section, were something he hadn't encountered before. He called Neville down and asked him to look at the plants nearest to those sections of the vault wall. Neville spent 20 minutes with them, his hands moving carefully through leaves and stems, reading the plants the way he read everything. These two, he said finally, indicating a pair of small, unremarkable-looking specimens in stone pots on the lowest shelf. These are the Orris Silvestris specimens I noted in the catalogue. But Harry, they're still alive. Whoever set up the preservation ward in here knew exactly what they were doing. These are in perfect condition. Paired specimens, Harry said. Do you know where the other pair in the catalogue would be? It lists another vault, Neville said, checking his reference notes. Potter Estate Vault, North Corner Shelf. They were in the Potter Estate Vault 20 minutes later. The north corner shelf held, among other things, several mundane-looking potted plants that had been sitting in a preservation stasis for 10 years. One pair matched. Neville confirmed it immediately, with a certainty that needed no qualification. Untraceable magical communication. Between the Potter estate and the Peveril vault. Active, viable, and sitting there. Can you key them to a specific person? Harry asked. So only one person can receive the transmission? Give me 2 days, Neville said, already pulling out his cultivation notebook. You have them, Harry said. The training changed in the 3rd week. It changed because of what happened on a Monday afternoon in the Gringotts reader's room when Hermione, cross-referencing a section on Slytherin bloodline magical traditions, found a passage in an annotated text about Parseltongue. She read it twice, then looked up. Harry. He was working through Ignotus notes on elemental direction. Parseltongue isn't just a language, she said. He looked up. Everyone knows it as the ability to speak with snakes and understand them, she said. But this text, it's from 1489, it's a commentary on Salazar Slytherin's original writings, and the author says that Slytherin himself described Parseltongue as having 3 registers. She turned the book toward him. Speech. That's the one everyone knows. Sensing, an ambient awareness of cold-blooded magical creatures and their emotional state, which is broader than just snakes. And, she tapped the page. Ward speech. The ability to communicate directly with the magical architecture of ward structures, effectively giving instructions to a ward in the same register you'd use to speak to a snake. Harry read the passage. Ward speech, he said. Slytherin used it to build Hogwarts' foundational wards, Hermione said, with the specific quality of excited emphasis she used when something was genuinely significant rather than merely interesting. The deep wards. The ones that have never been successfully fully replicated because nobody could work out how he communicated his intent to the ward structure so precisely. She paused. He talked to them. In Parseltongue. And the wards held because they understood exactly what was wanted. Harry sat very still for a moment, thinking about Hogwarts and its wards and a headmaster who had spent 40 years with essentially unrestricted access to the deepest magical architecture of the school. He used ward speech to modify the Hogwarts wards, Harry said slowly. Almost certainly, Hermione said. The question is what he modified. And whether I can hear what's been changed, Harry said. If the deep wards respond to Parseltongue, and I carry Slytherin's bloodline, you might be able to read the modifications like text, she finished. See exactly what's been done to the wards and when. They looked at each other. September 1st, Harry said. September 1st, she agreed. Sirius Black had been in Azkaban for 10 years, 4 months, and 16 days when Arcturus Black filed the motion for emergency review. The filing arrived at the Ministry on a Wednesday morning, and Amelia Bones, who had been waiting for it, moved it through her department with a speed that her subordinates found unusual and which she did not explain. It landed on the desk of the department head responsible for prisoner review at 11:15, accompanied by a 4-page legal brief from Gringotts and a stack of DMLE documentation that Bones had spent 3 weeks preparing. By 2 o'clock, a formal notification had been sent to Azkaban requesting the prisoner's transfer to ministry custody for the duration of the review proceedings. Harry heard about it from Arcturus directly, in a brief note that arrived with his usual owl. Motion filed and acknowledged. Transfer notification sent to Azkaban. Timeline for ministry processing, 1 to 3 weeks. Expect resistance from the minister's office. I am prepared for it. Harry wrote back, thank you. I'm prepared too. He wasn't entirely sure what that preparation looked like yet. Sirius Black being in ministry custody was better than Sirius Black being in Azkaban, but it wasn't the same as Sirius Black being free, and the gap between those two things would depend on a hearing process that Harry couldn't fully control and a ministry that had powerful reasons to prefer the status quo. He added Sirius's situation to his daily review list and thought, not for the first time, about what it would actually be like to meet him. 10 years in Azkaban did things to people. The war had done things to him before that. The young man laughing in the photograph from 1980 had been through things that Harry couldn't fully imagine yet, and whatever came out of Azkaban would not be that young man. He thought about that honestly, without flinching from it. Whatever state Sirius was in, damaged, altered, not the person in the photograph, he was still Harry's godfather and Harry was still going to be there. That didn't require qualifying. The day before the Wisengamot hearing, Dumbledore sent a third communication. Not through an intermediary this time. Not through a letter that could be read and filed and planned around. He came to Privet Drive himself, in the early evening, and knocked on the front door. Harry opened it. They looked at each other for the first time. Dumbledore was exactly what Harry had expected from photographs and reputation and the slowly assembled portrait of him that the past 3 weeks of research had built, tall, silver-haired, magnificent in the specific way of things that have been magnificent for so long it has become structural rather than performed. His robes were deep blue and star-scattered. His half-moon glasses caught the evening light. His eyes, behind those glasses, were a very particular shade of blue that moved the way deep water moves, with enormous purpose just below the visible surface. He was also looking at Harry with something he was doing an excellent job of not showing but which Harry, with his recently acquired sensitivity to the currents of magical intent, could read like a word written in the air between them. Dumbledore was shaken. Not by the legal proceedings, not by the hearing tomorrow, not by the filings or the coalition or the public coverage. By Harry. By the person standing in the doorway of this small house who was not the child he had spent 11 years imagining and planning for. Harry held the door open. Would you like to come in? Dumbledore stepped inside with the gracious movement of a man entirely at ease in unfamiliar spaces, and Harry led him through to the kitchen because the sitting room was Vernon's territory and the kitchen was where decisions got made in this house. Dumbledore sat at the kitchen table and looked around the room with eyes that missed nothing, and Harry thought he saw, behind those thoughtful blue eyes, a rapid assessment of everything the room said about how Harry had been living. The eyes came back to Harry. Something in them was no longer performing the deep water equanimity. Tea. Harry said.
Please, Dumbledore said. Harry made tea. He made it the way he made everything, with the focused competence of someone who had been cooking and cleaning and managing a household since he was old enough to reach the stove. He was aware of Dumbledore watching him, aware of the assessment happening, and he did not perform anything for it. He simply made the tea and set a cup in front of Dumbledore and sat down. You're here to talk to me before the hearing, Harry said. I'm here because I should have been here years ago, Dumbledore said, and it landed differently than Harry had expected because it didn't sound like a tactical opening. It sounded, surprisingly, like truth. Harry waited. I have been watching this house, Dumbledore said quietly, since the night I placed you here. Not physically, through monitoring charms, through Arabella Fig, through second-hand reports. I told myself I had good reasons for each choice. I told myself the security of the arrangement outweighed other considerations. He looked at Harry directly, over the rim of the teacup he hadn't yet raised to drink. Sitting here, in this kitchen, I am finding it more difficult to sustain that argument. The cupboard under the stairs, Harry said. Not as an accusation. Just as a fact, placed on the table between them like an object to examine. Dumbledore's expression didn't flinch, which Harry gave him credit for. Yes. The blocks, Harry said. Yes. The guardianship you assumed without my parents' knowledge or consent for that specific arrangement, Harry stopped. He tilted his head. Actually, did they know? My parents. Was there any provision in their wills for me to come here? A pause. The wills were sealed by ministry order following the events of October 1981, Dumbledore said carefully. That's not an answer, Harry said. Another pause. Longer. Dumbledore set his teacup down. No, he said. Your parents' wills did not specify this arrangement. The kitchen was very quiet. There was a godfather, Harry said. An alive godfather, at the time, who was specifically named. There were other magical guardianship provisions. And you placed me here anyway. I believed, I know what you believed, Harry said. He kept his voice even, not because he wasn't feeling things, but because this conversation required clarity more than it required expression. I've read your arguments. In the filing responses. Through Doge. I understand the structure of it. You believe that Voldemort would return, that I would need to face him, that shaping my childhood a certain way would produce a person better equipped to do that, and that the blood protection here was necessary regardless of other considerations. He paused. Did I miss anything? That's a fair summary, Dumbledore said, with something that was close to pain. The problem, Harry said, is that it assumes you had the right to make those decisions. It assumes that your assessment of what I needed was more valid than what my parents chose. More valid than what the law required. More valid than what I, even as a child, was entitled to. He looked at the old man across his kitchen table steadily. You made yourself the authority over my entire life based on your own judgment about what was necessary. And you did it so completely that you didn't leave a single gap for me to know who I actually was. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The deep-water eyes were very still. No, he said quietly. I did not. I'm not asking you to collapse at the hearing, Harry said. I'm not asking you to walk in and confess and hand your titles to the nearest bailiff. I know you're going to defend yourself because you believe your reasons were sound and because it's in your nature to. He leaned forward slightly. But I want you to know, going in, that I understand the argument you're making. And I want you to know that understanding it has not changed my position by 1 degree. Dumbledore studied him. 11 years old, he said, and there was something in his voice that was not condescension and not awe exactly, something in between, something from a man who had dealt with extraordinary people for 90 years and was recalibrating his category system in real time. Almost 12, Harry said. In 2 months. Something passed across Dumbledore's face that might, under different circumstances, have been the beginning of a smile. You have your mother's precision, he said. And rather more of your father's nerve than I expected,
given that the nerve was supposed to be, he stopped. Blocked, Harry said. The word settled over everything. Dumbledore stood, slowly, with the care of a very old man who was not going to show that anything hurt. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, I want you to know that the prophecy is real, Harry. I have spent 11 years building toward a moment that I believe is coming, and my fear, not for myself, but for you, is that you will walk into it without sufficient preparation. I appreciate the concern, Harry said. But I'd like to prepare myself, if that's all right. Dumbledore paused. And if my preparation and yours are incompatible? Then we'll find out, Harry said. For a long moment, the old headmaster stood in the Dursleys' kitchen in his star-scattered robes, looking at the boy who was not the boy he'd built a decade of plans around, and the boy looked back with steady green eyes and neither of them looked away. There is a prophecy, Dumbledore said quietly, at the door. When you're ready to hear it, on your terms, not mine, come to me. I will tell you everything. I'll consider it, Harry said. Not a yes. Not a refusal. Just an acknowledgement that the offer existed, which was more than Dumbledore had given him for 11 years, and they both knew the arithmetic of that. The morning of the hearing was grey and still, and Harry wore his best formal robes, the dark blue ones Adelaide had made him, with the small Potter crest stitched at the collar in silver thread, which he'd asked for specifically and which the tailor had executed with the quiet pride of a craftsperson given a worthy brief. Hermione met him at the ministry entrance at 8:30. She was wearing her own dress robes, dark green, which suited her in ways she hadn't seemed to fully notice. She had a leather satchel containing the complete legal documentation package, every filing, every certified document, every annotated cross-reference, organized by relevance to each anticipated hearing argument, with a summary index on the front. She had prepared it over 4 days and it was possibly the most thorough piece of legal organization Harry had ever seen, and he had been reading legal texts for 3 weeks. Are you ready? She said. Yes, he said. They went in. The Wizengamot chamber was underground and circular and had the quality of a space that had absorbed several centuries of consequential decisions and kept them in the walls. The tiered seating rose around a central floor in concentric semicircles, currently occupied by approximately 70 Wizengamot members in plum-colored robes, with a press gallery above and a public gallery above that, both of which were full. Tiberius Ogden presided from the high chair at the chamber's apex, a brisk, straight-backed man in his 70s who had the manner of someone who had been doing this for a long time and was going to do it correctly regardless of whose feelings it inconvenienced. Dumbledore was already in the chamber, seated in the respondent's chair in the central floor with the composure of a man attending a symposium at which he intended to give the keynote. His robes today were silver grey. He looked, Harry had to admit, magnificent. He looked like exactly what he had been for 50 years, the greatest wizard of the age, sitting in judgment of those who judged him, entirely unperturbed by the architecture of institutional challenge. It was an excellent performance. Harry and his legal party, Arcturus Black, Amelia Bones in her official DMLE capacity, and a Gringotts legal representative named Sharpthorn who spoke with the clipped authority of someone billing by the syllable, took their positions on the opposite side of the central floor. Hermione and Neville were in the gallery. Harry had argued briefly for Hermione to be at the floor level and she'd pointed out, with characteristic precision, that she didn't have official standing to be there and being seen attempting to bend procedure would undermine the very argument they were making about procedural integrity. She'd been right and he'd acknowledged it immediately. He looked up at the gallery as he took his position. She gave him the specific nod she reserved for situations that required steadiness, small, direct, completely without performance. Neville beside her had his hands folded on his knees and the posture of someone who had recently discovered what correct posture actually felt like and was using it. Harry turned back to the chamber. Ogden called the session to order. The reading of the charges took 11 minutes, because Sharpthorn had insisted on the full formal citation of every statute and there were 17 of them. Several Wizengamot members shifted in their seats. Dumbledore listened to all 17 with an expression of courteous attention. Then the evidence was presented. Sharpthorn led this part, and Harry watched the chamber as the certified Gringotts documents were entered into the official record one by one. The authenticated assessment. The magical signature analysis. The block structure documentation. The timeline of the block's placement, 16 months after Harry's birth, which Sharpthorne noted crisply was several months after any plausible war emergency rationale would have applied, since Voldemort had fallen in October 1981. The valuation of the suppressed inheritance, entered as irrefutable evidence of magical property theft under the Goblin Commerce Accords. Halfway through this presentation, Harry became aware of a shift in the chamber. It was subtle, the quality of attention in the tiered seats changing, the way attention changes when a room realizes it is not watching a procedural exercise but something with genuine weight. Several members were leaning forward. Several were making notes. Several were exchanging looks that were not the political signaling of people waiting to see which way the wind was blowing but the genuine looks of people who had just been told something they hadn't known and were processing the implications. Dumbledore's defense was 2 hours long and it was extraordinary. Harry listened to all of it without expression. He had prepared for it, had modeled it with Hermione across 3 sessions, had anticipated every argument, had built counter-responses for every point. But listening to it delivered in person, in Dumbledore's voice, with that specific quality of absolute conviction that came from decades of unquestioned authority, he understood very clearly why this man had shaped the wizarding world for 50 years. He was not lying. That was the thing. Every argument he made, he believed. The protection rationale was genuine. The prophecy reference, carefully partial, carefully controlled, but genuine, carried real weight in the chamber. The greater good framing was delivered with the quiet authority of a man who had bled for that good, who had lost people for that good, who had spent 50 years pouring himself into it. Amelia Bones caught Harry's eye once during the defense. Her expression was unreadable and it was extremely readable. When Dumbledore finished, Ogden looked at the legal party. Response. Harry stood. He had not told Arcturus or Sharpthorne or Amelia Bones that he intended to speak directly. He had not told Hermione. He'd added it to his list 3 days ago as a single line, speak for myself at the hearing. Not because it was strategically optimal. Because it was necessary. Ogden raised an eyebrow at an 11-year-old standing on the central floor of the Wizengamot, assessed whatever he saw there, and said, Mr. Potter. Thank you, Harry said. He had learned from watching Dumbledore that the first thing you did was acknowledge the room, so he took 1 second to look around it, not performing, just seeing it, letting it see him. Then he looked at Dumbledore. The respondent has made a sophisticated and sincerely held argument about necessity, Harry said. His voice was clear and carried well in the circular chamber, the acoustics were good and he'd tested them during the evidence presentation, learning the room the way Ignotus had taught him to learn things. I don't dispute the sincerity. What I dispute is the authority. He paused. The argument is essentially this: I knew better than Harry Potter's parents what Harry Potter needed, so I substituted my judgment for theirs. I knew better than Harry Potter's legitimate magical guardians what Harry Potter's living situation should be, so I arranged a different one. I knew better than Harry Potter himself what level of magical ability he should have access to, so I sealed 11 of 15 bloodlines and called it protection. He paused again. Each individual decision, in the respondent's framing, was made from wisdom and care. But what they collectively constitute is not protection. It is ownership. The chamber was very still. He owned my story, Harry said, and the simplicity of it landed harder than any legal citation. He decided what I would know, what I could do, who I would be, when I would find out the truth and on whose terms. Every mechanism of my life, my home, my magic, my heritage, my guardianship, was arranged so that when I arrived at Hogwarts, I would arrive as exactly the person he needed me to be. He looked at Dumbledore directly. Not who I was. Who he needed. He turned to address the wider chamber. I am not here asking you to condemn a man for caring about the outcome of the war with Voldemort.
I am asking you to confirm that the law exists precisely for moments when someone with the best intentions and the greatest power decides that their judgment supersedes other people's fundamental rights. He gestured to the documentation on the record stand. The statutes are clear. The evidence is certified. Whatever you believe about the respondent's intentions, the actions are not in dispute. They were taken without consent. They were taken against the explicit provisions of inheritance law, guardianship law, and the rights of a magical minor. He paused. The only question before this chamber is whether those laws apply to everyone, or whether there is a threshold of importance at which they stop applying. He sat down. The chamber was quiet for 5 full seconds. Then it was not quiet anymore. Ogden let it go for 30 seconds before calling for order. The vote on the formal censure came 3 hours later, after arguments from the floor that Harry followed carefully, tracking who said what and why. The coalition Augusta Longbottom had assembled held. Several members who had been listed as uncertain came down on the censure side, which Harry marked and filed. 2 of Dumbledore's staunchest public allies voted for censure, which meant they had looked at the evidence and made the calculation that the evidence won, and that was something, not sympathy, not betrayal of Dumbledore, just the arithmetic of inescapable documentation. The vote was 43 to 29 in favor of formal censure. Formal censure was not removal from office. It was the official finding of the Wisengamot that Dumbledore had violated his conduct obligations. From this, several things followed automatically under the Judicial Conduct Act. He was formally suspended from the Chief Warlock position pending a full review. A committee would be appointed to determine whether removal was warranted. The suspension was effective immediately. Ogden read the result with the flat authority of a man who had been doing this for 40 years and was going to do it correctly whether or not anyone in the room liked the outcome. Dumbledore listened to the reading with the composure he'd maintained all morning. He stood when it was done, smoothed his robes, and looked across the chamber floor at Harry. Harry looked back. Dumbledore gave a small, precise nod. Not concession exactly. Acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a player recognizing a well-played move, which was the closest thing to respect this particular interaction was going to produce. Harry nodded back, with the same precision. It was not over. Not by a significant distance. But the architecture had shifted, and they both knew the architecture. In the corridor outside the chamber, in the controlled chaos of Wisengamot members dispersing and reporters attempting to intercept them and ministry officials moving with the energy of people whose working day had just become considerably more complicated, Harry found Neville and Hermione waiting by the stairs. Hermione's expression was doing several things at once. She had both hands around her satchel strap and her eyes were very bright and she was managing herself very precisely, which meant she was more moved than she wanted to show in a public corridor. "You didn't tell me you were going to speak," she said. "No," Harry agreed. "It was the right call," she said, and there was something in her voice that was both the professional assessment and something warmer underneath it that she didn't qualify. "You should know that." "I do," Harry said. Neville was looking at the chamber door, which was still open, through which they could see the chamber beginning to empty. "Is it done?" he said. "The censure?" "The censure is done," Harry said. "The review committee will take 3 to 4 weeks to make the removal recommendation, then a final vote. The Mugwump review at the ICW is 2 weeks behind this." The Order of Merlin revocation was completed this morning. Hermione had shown him the notification over breakfast, so as of now he carries the Order of Merlin in name only pending the formal ceremony, which they won't hold until the other reviews are complete. 3 positions, Neville said quietly. "All 3. Suspended, under review, and revoked," Harry said. "Not stripped yet. But close." Amelia Bones walked past them in the corridor with Sharpthorn, moving fast. She caught Harry's eye and made a single gesture with her chin, a brief, contained movement that said "well done" in the specific language of people who had been doing things for a long time and reserved approval for things that earned it. Then she was gone, moving with purpose toward the DMLE lifts. Arcturus Black found Harry next to the stairs,
with the unhurried movement of a man who was waiting for the crowd to thin before moving through it. "The motion for Sirius's review," he said, without preamble. "The ministry responded this morning. Transfer to custody approved. He'll be at St. Mungo's within the week for a full medical and magical evaluation." "St. Mungo's, not a ministry cell," Harry said. "It was important. I insisted on it," Arcturus said. "Sharpthorn's team drafted the medical rights provisions. He'll be treated as a patient under review, not a prisoner." "Good," Harry said. "Thank you." Arcturus studied him for a moment. "In the chamber," he said. "The speech." "Yes. You looked like your grandfather," Arcturus said. "Charles Potter. He had the same quality of speaking quietly in a loud room and being the only one you heard." He held Harry's gaze briefly. "It's a gift. Use it carefully." He walked away before Harry could respond. Harry stood in the corridor for a moment, absorbing that. Then he felt it again, the presence at the edge of awareness, the cold and ancient attention, closer than it had been in the garden at Privet Drive. Not threatening. Not attacking. Just watching. He thought, "You heard too." He thought, "I know." He pushed it to the back of his awareness with the deliberateness of a choice, not an aversion, and turned back to Hermione and Neville. "Right," he said. "Lunch. I'm buying. And then we have 3 weeks of Hogwarts prep, and I want to talk about the ward speech theory before September, because if I'm right about what Dumbledore's done to the school wards, we're going to want a plan for it." "You think he's changed the wards?" Hermione said, falling into step beside him. "I think the wards at Hogwarts have had one person with unrestricted access for 40 years, Harry said. "I think that person is methodical and patient and has always known exactly what he wants from them. And I think reading what he's written into them is going to tell us a great deal about what he built Hogwarts to do." Neville was quiet for a step. "Then, when you say what he built Hogwarts to do, I mean the school," Harry said. "The sorting. The house system. The way information is distributed and restricted. The way certain students are developed and others are managed." He looked at Neville briefly. "The way certain students are told, very consistently, that they're less than they actually are." Neville was quiet again. "Oh," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "Oh." They emerged into the atrium and Harry felt the cool recycled air of the ministry lobby, and above them the flue fireplaces were roaring their normal green, and the magical world was continuing its day around them with no awareness that the balance of something significant had just shifted several degrees in a basement chamber 2 floors down. He thought about Sirius in Azkaban, moving toward freedom. He thought about 15 bloodlines running clear and unblocked. He thought about the Hogwarts wards, waiting to be read. He thought about a dark presence that had been watching him with genuine assessment, deciding whether to be interested, and felt with the same certainty he felt the Peveril current in his own blood that the answer to that question had already been reached. He held the door open for Hermione and Neville, and they walked out into the grey London afternoon together, and behind them the ministry building rose into its permanent mist, and somewhere in its bowels a 40-year architecture of carefully arranged power was beginning, slowly, to come apart at the seams. Harry walked in the direction of lunch. He was hungry. He had a list to work through. He had Hogwarts in 3 weeks. He was fine. He was, in fact, very fine.